There you go.
Well, good morning, all. Welcome to the December 12th meeting of the full TAG, Technical Advisory Group on the Clean Heat Standard for the Public Utility Commission. Welcome all. I hope you are all doing well after the long, rainy and ugly day yesterday. Let's see. I'm Rick Weston, Chair. Do a little bit of housekeeping at first to begin, and then we'll get into the agenda, which has changed, unfortunately, as a consequence of some absences. But as always, I encourage TAG members to keep their videos on and their audio off, and obviously, except when they wish to speak. Non-TAG members, I ask that you keep your video off and your audio off. And then when we call on you, if you wish to speak during a moment of public comment, you obviously can please turn on your video and audio at that point. We will have, I believe, some invited experts on behalf of some TAG members. As always, Matthew Bakerpool is here representing the Department of Public Service in TJ's absence. Adam Sherman will be here, you said, Emily Roscoe, for EBT when we discuss wood. Is Brian on yet? I don't see
Yes.
Brian. Oh, no. Let's see. Anyone else? Sam?
Yeah, Rick, I have Tristan Brown here today to speak on carbon accounting and health impacts issues.
Okay, thanks.
And I have Nora Travis here as a NESCOM colleague as well on health and wood.
Good. Okay. We have a quorum. Most of us are here, in fact. That's great. Okay. The key change to our agenda is that unfortunately, there was an emergency, a family emergency, and as a consequence, the folks from Opinion Dynamics will not be here. Okay, so we're not going to be able to have a discussion with them about their responses to our questions and any other questions we might have had about the latest draft of the TRM. When we get to that point of the agenda, I will take a poll, I hope, to see who's read their responses. And we can give some thought to what we want to convey to the PUC and Opinion Dynamics, if anything, about what remain for us outstanding issues. Let's see. With that, are there any other questions about the agenda? And if not, I will turn to Deirdre Morris of the PUC to give us some updates. Deirdre.
Shall we do the minutes first?
Oh, gosh, thank you for reminding me. Yes, hope you all had a chance to review the minutes from the last meeting. Well, yes, of the November 26th meeting. I always forget that. Thank you. I'll entertain a motion unless there are any recommended changes. I'll entertain a motion for approving them.
I move approval of the minutes.
Thank you, Ken. We have the motion. We don't look for seconds. So with that, all in favor of approving adopting the minutes of November 26th, raise your hand. The hand feature, or raise your hand and we'll do a count. If I could find mine, I would do it.
Yeah, I think at least for me, Zoom did an update and now it's under React.
Yeah.
Instead of being a
There it is.
standalone.
Yeah. Okay. All opposed, please signify by raising a hand. I see none. Any abstentions? Okay, we're good to go. Okay, Deirdre, thank you.
Thanks, Rick. So, right, Rick mentioned that Opinion Dynamics won't be able to join us this morning. But I did just want to, and we'll get there at the next agenda item, see if there's some value to going through the memo and the responses. But just wanted to highlight that first comment in their response document, that just kind of a reminder that this is not a static TRM or emissions table, and that Opinion Dynamics will be compiling kind of a list of potential items for future examination should the clean heat standard go forward. And so there's certainly value for the tag to prioritize or highlight certain things that should be kind of first on the list to consider should the TRM continue to evolve and CHS goes forward. So we'll talk about that in a minute, but just wanted to highlight that. Otherwise, I think it was last week that the commission issued its draft document on first year obligations. I think one of the big takeaways from that exercise and that document that we want to communicate is that that data was incredibly flawed, and we do not recommend using it. So, you know, it was kind of to fulfill the duty of processing that data and going through the exercise of how to do that if the data were much better, but that it's important that we communicate that that those obligations not be used given how flawed that first year of data was. I think that might be my only update. I mean, we're obviously getting to the tail end here, so you know, in terms of commission priorities, we're working on the, you know, getting the rule revised based on all the feedback that was given over the last, you know, that came in October. Writing the check back report, getting the economic impact analysis done. And so that's all kind of our priorities from now until January 15th. Yeah, Ken.
Is there a workbook available for how the first year obligation was determined? I mean, the text is there, but it, you know, it cites data that I'm not sure I knew exactly what they were using. I think in particular, it's the tax data, and I don't know if Matt's on, but whether indeed the tax data represents the use of those delivered fuels, as you know, it gets back to the inventory that has a slightly different measure for historic use, and because the target is based on anyway. My question is there a workbook that describes the math?
Yeah, my internet froze for a little bit, but I think I got the gist of the question. So, because so there was an order back in, I think in February or something, about confidential treatment of the fuel dealer data. So we can't share kind of the main workbook that goes through all of the reported gallons and suppliers, you know, all of that type of thing. But what I think would be useful is to provide kind of a mock-up of at least that portion of the fuel sale, just the fuel sales portion, and provide that to anyone who wants it so that they can see the math and how it was done. Because that gets to the same question. It just will leave the fuel sales part confidential. And then the only other thing is I did get a question from Brian Woods that I can answer here, is that it did not match the fuel tax data. Like the obligated gallons did not line up well with the aggregate gallons that the Department of Taxes reported for that. Yeah, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Deirdre, for that explanation. Couple clarifying issues and then questions, because I think this is a really important document if everyone hasn't seen it. The first is that they don't match up fuel tax, and it says it in a paragraph in that response that you had, or whoever produced it, simply because wholesalers and state wholesalers do not pay the fuel tax. And while some proportion of our fuel comes from outside of the state, so it's natural that the retailers would pay the fuel tax and register that. We have large wholesale suppliers that do not ever pay the fuel tax, the 2 cents per gallon weatherization tax, or the 1 cent petroleum cleanup fee on heating oil, kerosene, and dyed diesel. So that's why they would never match up, and why it makes it a little bit more confusing. And then the other piece that I had, which is we've had 3 deadlines obligated parties had, or not obligated parties, entities that sell fossil fuel, heating oil, propane and kerosene, natural gas and coal. And this represents, I just want to clarify that I think this is right, but please Deirdre, tell me if I'm wrong. This represents the individuals, companies that registered either by the January 31st deadline or by the February 20th extension, but not those that registered after March 1st, but before the new October 31st deadline. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
And then the follow-up question is there a list of those that registered after March 1st that's publicly available, but before the October 31st deadline? And then the corollary to that is, will those, assuming, and I know there is at least one in that universe, will there be another reanalysis when you incorporate all of those that registered after the second deadline, but before the third deadline? In other words, I look at this quite clearly as here's the number we have to reach in terms of credit obligations based on fossil fuel sales that were recorded. But if it's like the dinner checks come due and 12 people late, but only 3 people threw in a credit card, now that we know a couple more people have thrown in a credit card, will there be a reanalysis of that obligation, or is this it?
Yeah, so in the order we kind of said this alone invalidates the, not being able to have the time we set that October 31st kind of extra grace period almost. I mean, it wasn't characterized that way, but to allow people that didn't fully understand the obligation or the scope of what we were asking people to register. But there was not enough time to process those registrations. A huge number of late registrations did come in after that enforcement order went out in, I think it was October. So we are not going to be processing those registrations between now and January 15th. It kind of remains to be seen whether after that it would make sense to process those. We need to kind of reconvene and my personal take is that the 2023 sales data is just really flawed. So it would be difficult to, even with those late registrations, kind of represent that data as good enough to really be like representative of the correct obligations in the market. So
totally understand that. Can I just ask, totally understand. I'm sorry to cut you off, but just the list of those that registered, not the what their obligation would be under a whole reconfiguration of the entire obligation spread out amongst those, but just
Right.
the list of those that registered between March 1st and October 31st.
Yeah, we did ask the commission about that, and they decided not to publish that list of late registrants. I can bring that back of, that would be kind of helpful industry information, or, just.
Well, I think the concern is, I'll just be quite frank with you, the concern from those that did register was, okay, we have been given permission to
Right.
register after February 28th. We did so. Is there a record of that? Because they fear the consequences because there actually are fines that could be imposed for those that did not register, and want to make sure that they are. I've had numerous questions saying, hey, I registered, I did it after the deadline, it was still permitted.
Mm-hmm. But I'm not being.
Am I being counted? Am I going to get a letter from the Attorney General saying I owe a $10,000 fine?
Understood.
That's
Okay.
the question.
Yeah, the current plan is no, but I certainly will, take this back and with that perspective.
Thank you, Drew.
Ken?
Yeah, I just want to recognize to people that this exercise is just that, it's an exercise. This was the 2023 utilization sale of fuels that would have informed a 2024 obligation, which of course there isn't one. But I think it's also important to note, we're at December 12th, 2024. And to have used that process to establish the obligation for 2024 is obviously not going to work. Of course, it would be better next year. But when we get to 2026 and try to compile the information from 2025 to establish the 2026 obligations, I've put this in writing. It is impossible to accomplish that in less than probably 8 months, which is why I've submitted this process. And yeah, you can come to the conclusion, oh, the clean heat standard is a failure because this registration process doesn't work. Well, if the registration process could be changed to more closely align with the actual reporting that's done on the fuel tax, which would, yes, change the definition of an obligated party to remove those folks that are wholesale vendors, just putting it right on the retail sales, which we have a mechanism where fuel dealers respond within, I think it's 6 weeks of their sale. And I know there's still a difference between that quantity, but this exercise, I do think, pointed out that this approach is very, very problematic, but I don't want it to be translated. Therefore, the clean heat standard won't work, which is unfortunately how some people are translating this. So I just want to make us aware that, yes, this exercise identified all sorts of flaws, but there are other remedies.
Yes, and if I may, Rick.
Go ahead, Matt.
Which is not, I think the PUC did what they were required to do by the law. And I think Ken and myself and others may be in agreement that there's a better way, but the law needs to change, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we'll have a little bit of that conversation at the end of this meeting. But yes. Thank you all. Deirdre, anything else?
I don't think so.
Okay. Next on our agenda was not the OD conversation, but conversation on wood topics, and I'm going to hand it to Brian and Emily. But before I do, I'd just like to, I want us to be clear about what we're going to try to accomplish in the next 40 minutes. And we have allocated 40 minutes for this. You've given us a document that has a lot to it and has a number of things that state what the tag thinks, if we of course agree to the document. I encourage you to focus on the decisions that you're asking the tag to make so that we can conduct a straw poll and then a poll on it, or a poll as appropriate. So with that in mind, I turn to Brian and Emily.
Great. Catherine, do you have the document? I'm just trying to find the final version that went out, but if you have it.
Yeah,
it would be easier.
Catherine's going to put it up and make suggested changes.
Okay, yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just to frame this, this kind of built off of a subgroup meeting that we held on November 5th. I can't remember when we did what, but as I'm sure everybody recalls, we had a meeting where we discussed the definition of advanced wood heating. None of what we're going to discuss today is trying to reopen any of that. Like, we had that discussion, we took votes about definitions of advanced wood heating. That was very helpful. We made progress on that, but there were some other issues related to wood that were not resolved by the definition of advanced wood heating. And so the intention of this write-up is to at least report on the status, if not communicate some resolution where I thought the results were maybe more clear on the other outstanding issues related to wood, which I boiled down into kind of two questions. One is how those advanced wood heating measures should be characterized in the TRM. So this is sort of a direct lead in to the opinion dynamics discussion. I recognize that they won't be here, but I am hoping that the discussion around question one would, like, the intention of this is sort of like to convey to opinion dynamics, here's what we think you should do with respect to wood in the TRM. So the first portion of this is kind of like comments for OD on the TRM. The second relates to calculation of carbon intensity for wood biofuels, which actually also feeds into the TRM. So all of this is sort of, guidance for opinion dynamics. I'm not sure how much of this is, if they're going to be able to implement all of this, given how close to the final deadline they are on the TRM. But we didn't have this ready last time. And so the second draft TRM didn't include a lot of potential updates with respect to wood. And I think that came forward in the tags discussion. So this is my attempt to kind of clean that up as best we can and convey something a little more clearly articulated. Okay. So with that said, and I should note, I'm not really wearing my NESCOM hat here. I'm really wearing, just tag vice chair who's attempting to like organize the tags thinking on this and status. So on question 1, treatment of advanced wood heating in the TRM, I started by just summarizing what is in the TRM. There are 4 wood heat measures. There's central pellet systems for CNI and for residential, and then there's pellet and cordwood stoves for CNI and for residential. They seem to have basically the same characterization, whether residential or commercial. At least I didn't focus on any distinctions between the two. But there were a couple things that I think the tag found a little odd about how these measures have been characterized in drafts 1 and 2 of the TRM. One is that they were assumed to, for the installed measures, it was assumed that a higher efficiency wood heating system is replacing a lower efficiency wood heating system. So there was sort of an assumed wood to wood replacement that I think many of us did not feel was appropriate, since we do think that in a clean heat context, a lot of people would be switching from fossil fuels to wood. And then sort of relatedly, the way they had done this was to kind of separate out, like they had an installed measure component and then a fuel switch measure. So wood was sort of in there as both an installed measure and a fuel. So just like, RNG is a fuel, and if you swap to RNG, there's like a carbon intensity associated with that. There is a carbon intensity just for the wood fuel, for firewood, chips, and pellets. And I think my sense of the tags discussion at several meetings, but again, you all correct me, is that it probably doesn't make sense to have a standalone fuel measure for wood, both like practically, in that you can't just like take an oil furnace and put wood in it necessarily. So it's not like an easy fuel switch the way certain, oil to biodiesel or renewable, those kinds of switches could be more possible without changing out the system. But wood, you're installing like a whole integrated system where the fuel and the installed measure are kind of integrated together. And in that way, I was kind of thinking that this measure would operate more like the heat pump measure, where it's an installed measure. It incorporates, a fuel switch component that looks at the carbon intensity of electricity and the carbon intensity of the fuels being replaced. But all of that is sort of wrapped into the installed measure. So they had started making this switch in the second draft, like Catherine, and maybe you could make this 1 notch bigger. I don't know if it's rather small for others. But if you go to the top of the next page,
Oops. Sorry.
no, that's okay. Thank you. Yeah, if you go to the top of the next page, this edit is not my edit. This red line is like literally from the second draft TRM, where in the characterization of the fuel measures, Opinion Dynamics had proposed to make this edit, where it used to say they potentially had the ability to substitute fuels at will, whereas now they're limiting it to like, you only get the fuel switch if you've made a capital investment to replace thermal equipment that uses fossil fuels with an advanced wood heating equipment. So I think this is in line with where we're headed. I think I'm not sure if I've explained any of this clearly, but I think I'll stop and see what comments and questions other tag members have.
Well, I'll to start and say that my understanding from the responses to our questions, OD's responses, which we received yesterday, and I hope we all had a chance to look at, they're eliminating wood as a fuel, so that alignment seems to be occurring, if I understand it correctly.
Right. Yeah, and I just a slight clarification. I don't think it would be eliminated in that when we see the spreadsheet characterizing the carbon intensity values for all the fuel measures, there would still be lines for, pellets and things like that and wood measures. And they said they needed to keep them because they might be in the baseline and like they still get referenced and calculated in, but they wouldn't be a standalone fuel measure anymore. So I just wanted to clarify that they wouldn't be likely to disappear from that spreadsheet, but they wouldn't be treated as a potential kind of standalone fuel swap any further.
So Emily, it sounds like you're asking if folks have any questions about these 3 points.
Yeah, I think this was my attempt to write a recommendation, some of which, as Rick has noted, is sort of already somewhat in process.
If there are no questions in terms of understanding it, I guess the next question we want to put to the tag is whether or not everybody is comfortable with this, which is the line that says the tag supports this change.
And I read that as just that sort of red line piece. The bigger change is what I do believe the consultants did respond to, and that is that they will have to develop a new characterization of the appliance shift. That is a shift from the use of fossil fuel, probably the same blend that they use in heat pumps, to wood, where you're right, it's the carbon intensity value for the wood fuel that's being used. So that change is not represented in this text. I mean, it's a recommendation, but it's not a change, if that's okay. But again, I think they're on the right track. So I support that whole first topic, including that specific text change, but also those the 3 feedback items, in part because Opinion Dynamics I think has accepted them. But so my sentiment is to approve this first topic as written. Thank you, Emily.
Yeah, and maybe some of this is unnecessary because we've managed to capture this result anyway through just the back and forth and the discussion. But I just thought it might be useful to sort of document for prosperity in a form other than just kind of a lot of informal back and forth. So.
So if I could just, before we move to the second question, see if there are any objections to this as written being forwarded to the PUC on behalf of the tag.
Can I ask a clarifying question here? I don't know why I can't find my raise hand function, but
It's under React, under the heart, if you have a heart.
oh,
You have a heart, Matt, really.
I don't have a heart, but I'll try to find the raised hand. Can I just summarize your summary?
Yes.
Please.
And tell me if I got this right. So what we're essentially saying is what I think we've already decided, which is we're not providing any credits for the purchase of the biomass fuel, that we are limiting any credits that can be obtained under a clean heat standard or a potential clean heat standard to a certain subsect of pellet burning appliances. Do I have that right?
That's not about this, Matt, I don't think, excuse me.
It's not about
Okay.
pellet. That's right. It's not.
Okay, maybe I need to clarify it again then.
So I think if we amended your statement to a certain subset of defined advanced wood heating installed measures, then that would be a
Okay.
correct statement. And then, I mean, in practice, in early stages, were this to move forward, that would be likely pellets because other fuels are to be evaluated a little bit down the road, but they're not ruled out for posterity.
Okay, so we're not limiting future decisions to allow advanced wood burning equipment that burns something other than pellets.
Right, right. The way we did our definition of advanced wood heat is we held off because we lacked confidence in the EPA testing methods for those technologies at this point.
But they can be reevaluated
Right.
down the road. So in practice, this would likely result in the eligible, were this to be implemented in year one, it is likely that only pellet, qualifying pellet equipment would be eligible, but that's not necessarily true for all time.
And then not to hold this up any longer, but just to clarify, we are providing a recommendation on how future appliances should be evaluated. Is that implicit, or is that something obvious that I'm just not tracking with?
That was in the prior, I think that issue, as to the extent we're going to address it, was put to bed in whatever comments we developed on advanced wood heating, where there was some language about revisiting, like I think we have encouraged that there be like, were this to move forward, there's a TRM that gets like updated through some standard process every 3 years. And at that time, and someone can always petition to add a measure in between those updates, but there would also be some sort of regular update cycle where it would be a natural point to reconsider such things.
Okay, so the TRM have that ability. If the tag dissolves, it
Yeah.
doesn't, we don't have to reform in order to figure out a new appliance that burns.
Well, I mean, it's all up to the PUC, but our recommendation was to have, something more like how the TRM works with the EEUs, where it's a living document that is updated at a regular cycle.
Just as a point of clarification, I believe on the advanced, and I need somebody else to check me on this. On that advanced wood heat measure characterization, we did not have a strong majority support in the vote. Is that
That's
correct?
correct.
We cannot say that the tag recommended that as a whole. But it is on the record that we took a vote on that.
That's correct. Thank you for correcting me.
All right. So just one more, let me just ask one more time. Are there any objections to this language before we move to the next section? I'm not going to ask for an overall vote until we get to the end. Any other clarifications, changes to language, objections to how it's drafted? Okay, Emily, I will slide you up to the next one.
Great. So this kind of flows from the PowerPoint that I shared at that subgroup meeting back in November, where we started by just confirming, like, this is how we think it actually works, because it's a bit confusing. And when I say this, what I mean is how Opinion Dynamics is calculating life cycle emissions rate / carbon intensity for wood biofuels. I'm sorry, I thought I turned that ringer down. So I won't go over this equation, but it is, I did try to document in this section, like, there are some things that I think are totally unresolved, where I just tried to kind of document the state of affairs, and where I thought there was like an understanding this approach makes sense, I tried to write that. So, feel free to correct me if I've mischaracterized any of that. But so at any rate, we think this equation makes sense, is accurate. And I noted that, like, there's a sentence at the end of the first paragraph, the tag agrees that this equation is appropriate to use. It shows where GWP Bio is factoring in, and that it's applying to the CO2 combustion emissions. If you scroll back up, Catherine.
Okay, sorry.
So yeah, so we've broken them into pieces. There's the assumptions for the combustion emissions, the assumptions for the upstream emissions, and the assumptions for the GWP Bio. Combustion emissions, I've just documented what Opinion Dynamics says they did. We had a short discussion about that at the subgroup meeting and nobody indicated that they felt that was inappropriate. So I've simply documented that and said the tag agrees that this approach is appropriate. So no issues to my knowledge on combustion emissions. We're good there. Upstream emissions in GWP Bio, there are potentially some issues. I think on the upstream emissions, they used GREET. We generally think that makes sense. The issue that I think is sort of the one that could be more controversial is that the calculation of upstream emissions is sensitive to assumptions around where the biofuels are sourced, particularly whether they're purpose grown or harvested products, like you're growing a forest and you're harvesting it to produce a pellet versus is it purely a waste product, such as logging and mill residue, where, you know, you were harvesting that wood for some other purpose and there is some waste material created, in which case you would sort of downgrade the upstream emissions because that wasn't like the purpose of the upstream activity. So that assumption ends up being really important. I think I'll keep going because there's, I think, a better discussion of that issue under GWP Bio where it is also relevant. So all this text does is sort of note, actually, if you go back up, Catherine, to the, yeah, right there would be good. I've said, so, you know, if you just read the end of this, if pellets are considered a waste product, then it would follow that upstream emissions associated with forest management, harvesting, and lumber milling should be set to 0 to reflect that these products are not driving those activities. We have received public comments and some tag comments disagreeing with characterization of pellets as primarily a waste product. I don't want to speak for ANR, so would defer to Brian to weigh in on this, but I asked Catherine to recirculate ANR's issue briefing, which included a statement that wood pellets are primarily made from logging and mill residues. So they're just, so all this is doing is documenting that there seems to be some disagreement between, you know, various parties on the extent to which pellets are a waste product or residue. But at any rate, this is something that comes up again in GWP Bio. So if you scroll down now to C, you know, there's the beginning of this is sort of some discussion of what GWP Bio is. It took me a while to even understand what it is, but it's just, it's factoring in the fact that like forests regrow and, you know, on a 100-year time scale, maybe, you know, all of this is fully renewable. But at the same time, there's like timing issues between how long it takes things to regrow versus combustion. So anyway, that's what GWP Bio does. Again, there are two sort of things that I think could be, that are important supporting assumptions where we, I think, have some disagreements. Skipping down to the number 2 here, that's that waste issue that I previously noted. This becomes really important because if, say for a pellet, if it's assumed to be 100% a waste product, then that will zero out the CO2 combustion emissions, not the nitrous oxide and methane emissions, but the CO2 combustion emissions would be zeroed out because you're going to end up multiplying them by 0. So that has a big impact. You know, the extent to which you assume that it's waste has a big impact on how GWP Bio affects the carbon intensity calculation. The other assumption has to do with the tree species mix, where there was a bunch of back and forth about that, and Opinion Dynamics made some updates on that. ANR provided some recommendations and suggested a source that could be used to update the species mix to be more reflective of Vermont forests. So that's all discussed in the subsequent paragraph, but if you, can you keep scrolling down, Catherine? And keep going to the next page. The issue there, though, is that it's not clear to me that all of the, for pellets in particular, that they're being sourced from Vermont forests. We don't seem to have great data on where pellets are coming from. I personally had an anecdotal conversation with somebody at Vermont DEC where they said to me, most pellets produced in Vermont are sold to Boston and New York or as a boutique product, while pellets used in Vermont are mostly imported from Canada. So I don't know. I don't know how accurate that is. I have no way to validate that. It would be great to have some data on where the pellets being used in Vermont are coming from, but it was just a little, it was notable to me that we seem to be proceeding down this path of like updating the assumptions based on the forest mix in Vermont, when the pellets burned in Vermont may not actually be coming from Vermont forests. They seem to be coming from like Canadian, possibly Western Canadian forests in some cases. So I don't know what to do with that, but it's an issue that I've documented. So I'm not like making a recommendation. The only little piece where I said we support this change is that the an earlier draft TRM had pellets as only being eligible if they came from the Northeast. And they changed that to require that the language to say imported from North America. I don't see any reason to disagree with that particular change. Again, I'm not like, I haven't actually offered any recommendations here. All I'm doing is trying to kind of like document the state of affairs and identify resources. ANR had 2 studies, the second 2 listed if you keep scrolling down, Catherine. I looked at those and tried to kind of pull out like what they actually said about where pellets came from. They're also, my NESCOM colleagues identified another source, this Thomas Buchholz paper that, that also looked at it. So there were a few papers that have some discussion of the extent to which pellets are waste and maybe where they're coming from, but it's not clear to me any of that is something we could take to the bank. So at any rate, none of this is, I tried to be like, take a really light touch, and that I therefore have not offered a recommendation on any of these. All I've done is like explain the issue and the state of affairs and highlight some papers that could be looked at. I think there's just,
Matt has his hand raised.
Yeah, just a quick commentary, Emily, to what you're saying about the complications of figuring the sourcing. I just want to point out what is probably obvious to everyone, but that much like the previous discussion about the registration and where the fuel's coming from, unlike electricity with long-term power agreements, pellets are just like heating oil and propane. It's a dynamic market. It's not static, where one pellet supplier picks up pellets today might be different tomorrow. It's certainly going to be different next year. And yeah, there are producers identified in the New England area and in Canada, but an individual purchaser of pellets or seller of pellets will change year to year depending on market forces, the price of the pellets, and the ability of the company to produce it at a rate that provides maximum profit.
Yeah, I hear you, Matt, and that obviously presents a challenge because it involves making some guesses or assumptions about an average source
Right.
for pellets of some kind. I will note that, this again is sort of trying to like help provide some information that could guide opinion dynamics as they finalize the TRM. The current state of affairs based on the ANR memo that said that pellets are 100% waste is that they are assuming that pellets are 100% waste in the latest draft of the TRM, which ends up reducing the upstream emissions and zeroing out the GWP bio, CO2 combustion emissions. So that has been kind of incorporated into the second draft of the TRM, and it's not clear, like I personally don't agree that we should assume that they are 100% waste, but I don't have an alternative proposal to offer either. So I'm not quite sure where that leaves opinion dynamics in their effort to finalize this thing. They're also using a tree species mix that is likely imperfect based on ANR's input, but is more based on an assumption of a Vermont forest, which again may not be appropriate, but again, I don't know what to do with that. So all I have managed to do here is try to like document sort of the state of affairs and the range of opinions without taking a position. I don't know where that actually leaves our TRM
Well-
consultant. at
Well,
this point.
actually, Emily, where it leaves us is where we're going to be in the next part of the discussion as well. And that is, I think, leaving the PUC and any future consultant, whether it's OD or not, with, as you say, a list of issues that are amenable to reconsideration, that are still, capable of refinement as the program advances. So, that makes sense to me. I was just actually really interrupting to let you know that Adam has his hand up.
So yeah, a quick suggestion that in terms of treating all pellet fuel as one like average monolith, there might be a slightly easier way to kind of break out two buckets. One is what is known about bulk pellets that are delivered throughout the region, that those are a little bit easier to characterize without the added complexity of bagged pellets. So those are two basic buckets that you could use to put a slightly finer point on some of the, the multitude of parameters of where it comes from and what sort of source materials are made. That would be my recommendation.
Is there any, sourcing, like, I don't know enough about the pellet market to know, like, does that lead us towards some assumption that you could make based on bulk pellets, or like, is there a data source for that?
Not one singular data source, but there are bits and pieces that can be cobbled together to do a little bit more fine-tuned characterization of bulk fuel, where it comes from, what the source materials are, how far it comes in its upstream processing, versus the more complex market of bags, which can be, very local and from the Northeast, or as other people have noted, they can be imported from surprisingly far away distances.
Mhm. Any other comments, or I guess I'd also love to turn it over to Brian to see what comments you would add from A&R's perspective. I have done my best to try to like carefully integrate what A&R's information and position was based on your prior write-up as best I could, but I if I've introduced anything inaccurate, I just would love to hear your comments from A&R.
Oh, yes, thank you, Emily, and thanks for all of this work. So Chair Weston, I am happy to report that I have visited the Oracle at Montpelier, who has imparted upon me great guidance that I shall share as appropriate. I do have a question about this whole second section. Emily, I think, as you said, you've done a lot of work documenting, but just process-wise, like, what are we discussing and deciding upon here? That's not very clear to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think in an ideal world, if we could come to an agreement on some of these things, like where should we assume pellets are coming from, and what percentage of them is waste versus purpose produced, that would be very actionable guidance we could provide to Opinion Dynamics to incorporate into the TRM and the fuel emission schedules and all of that. It's not clear to me that we're at that point. So like I said, I think that leaves Opinion Dynamics with some questions where it's mainly just us writing this up and conveying this to the PUC, and they can therefore figure out what to do with it and what they should tell Opinion Dynamics to do, but it's more just documenting it for posterity as like, this is a bit of a thorny issue. Here's the thinking we did on it. Here's the range of perspectives. Do with it what you will.
So really, certainly as far as the sourcing, we aren't going to resolve that today or before the end of the year.
Yeah, I guess I'm
Or maybe
open
not for
to like
months.
if A&R or someone else wanted to be like, I propose that we assume that it's 50-50 waste and sourced from X, like I would be very open to that. It's not clear to me that we have the information to do that.
Right. Well, when the forestry folks were on and in our issue brief, we did offer to work with Opinion Dynamics with the FIA data to be able to provide a little insight to that. But that is not a process that's going to happen, again, within the deadline that we're talking about for the TRM. So I think if the answer to my question is regarding the species composition for wood fuels and making a recommendation on that today, the answer is no, we're not going to be doing that.
I think
Right?
that's correct.
Okay. Just so regarding the assumptions for upstream emissions, and forgive me, I did not read this closely in advance. So if I'm looking at the top of question 2 and the formula for determining the life cycle emissions rate. And if you can scroll to that, Catherine, I think that's
About
a little bit helpful.
right there.
So, there's upstream emissions, then there's the combustion emissions from methane and N2O, and then there's the combustion emissions of CO2 times the GWP bio. It appears, my understanding is that upstream emissions are separate from the CO2 emissions. And I want to use the example of wood pellets. Like wood pellets are a highly processed fuel. They are sourced largely from residual materials from logging operations for higher value timber products. But then they are trucked, they are dried, they are compressed, they are bagged, they're shipped, and that's reflected in the emissions rate that Opinion Dynamics developed for wood pellets, and it's much higher for both cordwood and chips. Chips, they just chip them up, and there's much fewer processing. So those are all the upstream emissions that are accounted for in GREET. That's different from since a lot of those emissions are for fossil fuel processes. The drying is sometimes done with natural gas. Transportation is all fossil fuel. All that, none of that is being resequestered by the biomass. And so that factor is separate from the CO2 combustion and the GWP bio discussion. And the way I read B is like those two are being conflated. And I think it's important to separate those. So absolutely, just like any other fuel, biofuels of any kind, including wood fuels, have upstream processing emissions that are associated with them, and they should appropriately be accounted for in the emission factor, regardless of what the feedstock is. Regarding CO2 combustion emissions and the GWP bio, yes, the agency's position is that the wood fuels are, wood harvests are primarily for high value wood products, saw timber and the like, tops and limbs, other types of products that are other types of biomass that result from those harvests and that are used for feedstocks elsewhere, like for wood fuel, because in a life cycle analysis, you say, here's the emissions that are associated with that. How do we assign the CO2 emissions to each of the, the product or the functional unit that you're working with, and to waste? And so a typical way to do it is to say, yes, here's all the emissions are associated, but for this high value product, this harvest would not have happened. And so the emissions associated with that should be associated with the primary product. And then for the residuals, then that, it wouldn't be, because if you assign emissions to both of them and didn't apportion them, that would be double counting. And so that's where we are suggesting that a GWP bio of 0 is appropriate for wood fuels. And The GWP calculator actually allows for you to say, like, here's how, here's the species composition, and here's how much of it is residual or waste material, and it would just score it as 0. I think that tool is helpful. I don't think it's the only tool or methodology that's available to be able to do this calculation. I think, our forestry staff folks have made it really clear, and Emily reflects this, that it's really important to make sure that you are identifying the proper, composition of species to be able to make a calculation that will work. So we'll, I know we resolved the issue, or the TAG forwarded its recommendation regarding, both cordwood and, the GWP factors. And we're going to be, agency is going to be just submitting some additional comments on that through the docket. And we're going to do that before the end of the week.
Thanks, Brian. I'd like to go to Ken and then Emily Grubert, and then back to you, Emily.
Yeah, and I bottom line, to answer Brian's question, what we need is a carbon intensity value for wood, wood pellets in particular. And I appreciate all this discussion. We're never going to come up with a perfect number, especially in the short term. But I just want to add a little bit of clarification there. I believe we really need to think of wood in 3 buckets. Purpose-grown fiber for wood pellets in Vermont is very close to 0. That world is largely in southeastern United States, and a lot of those pellets, massive pellet mills, and they go to foreign markets. I do not believe that we tap into that. We may a little bit. I look at Tractor Supply. I know that they source some of theirs from the Mid-Atlantic and maybe in the South. So maybe, but the Maine pellets, the New York pellets, the Quebec pellets, the Western Canada pellets are not purpose grown. So I think we can largely eliminate that. But then I don't like the use of the word waste because it upsets people. And it's inappropriate. It is low. There is waste. There is mill waste. And I know I was able to get pellets for a while from a flooring mill, where they processed wood and they end up with sawdust that they turned into pellets. That's where it is appropriate that the GWP bio is 0 and the upstream emissions is fairly close to 0. Because that's actually a dried product already, it has to go through the compressor. That actually isn't much. And then the transportation, yes, the transportation to the ultimate end user is somewhat, but a lot of the upstream emission calculations include a lot of actions that for that mill waste product is really close to 0, okay? But there are a lot of pellets that aren't mill waste. And I do challenge Brian a little bit. We have significant amount of forestry practices, in part directed by current use program, where people are asked to remove low economic value wood from their woodlot in order to allow for later, it's not at the same time, for later the harvesting of higher value trees. So people are going in and pulling out, and this used to be the market for pulpwood, very small diameter, crooked crap. That is now going to pellet mills. And it is in between that mill waste product and the purpose grown product. And I've said to others, I was raised on the belief that timber management practice was appropriate for Vermont and Northeast. And again, I don't know nearly as much in Quebec and certainly not Western, but it's an appropriate mechanism. And yet it does not have a GWP bio of 0 by any stretch. It does take time for that forest, not 100 years, takes time for that forest to be able to reestablish the carbon that's been removed. But ultimately it leads you to a better, certainly a better economic forest, which also then allows for Vermont and other places in the Northeast to maintain forest, which I think we all agree maintaining forest is a critical component. all this said, I don't know what the carbon intensity value should be. And we're not going to come up with a perfect one. And I know there are people on this call that are going to make comments about it's too low. It should be higher. I understand their arguments. And I wish there was a way to take some of that argument and increase from low assumptions where GWP bios are established at 0. But I don't. But I think we're going to have to accept, we need a carbon intensity value for wood pellets. We're going to have to accept a value. It will not make anyone happy. That I can be sure. And I'm not sure that this group can provide a very specific number. And that's unfortunate. I wish we could, but we probably can't.
Thanks,
So-
Ken. Emily Grubert?
Yeah, and I'll be quick because I think Brian and Ken are making a similar point. I think we, just from a technical perspective, do need to be careful about conflating whether something is a byproduct with zeroing out some of the upstream emissions associated with getting it versus zeroing out the combustion emissions. And I think just by way of illustration, I completely agree that cutting down something and like all the chainsaw emissions and those types of things probably shouldn't be allocated to a product that would not have existed otherwise. That makes sense because those emissions are being fully allocated to the higher value product, but that actually doesn't have any bearing on whether there are any combustion emissions. And so this notion of, is it a byproduct? Therefore, we're declaring the GWP bio to be 0. I think we need to be very careful about that. And maybe the easiest illustration here is, are the combustion emissions associated with pellets being assigned basically to timber wood somewhere? Where are those combustion emissions going? If there's not something else that they're assigned to, we need to be really careful of where those end up. So don't want to relitigate exactly what the CO2 factor should be, but whether upstream emissions are associated to something shouldn't really influence what the combustion emissions determination is.
Thank you, Emily. Emily Levin, I'm going to return it to you, but let me just toss something out here. We're past our time, I believe, so we do want to wrap up. What I'm hearing, and you tell me if folks tell me if I got it wrong, is that the tag may be able to resolve topic 1 fairly easily, but topic 2, whether we, in other words, do we agree on a document that, encapsulates this discussion in some way or another? I'm not hearing that possibility, but I could be wrong. And if that's the case, we may want to treat these as 2 documents and take up topic 2 at a later time as appropriate. That's just what I'm hearing. I'm turning it back to you, Emily, for wrapping this up. Well, heading us toward wrapping it up.
Yeah, I appreciate all the comments. I do want to clarify that the upstream emissions, if you assume that pellets were 100% of waste or residue, that wouldn't result in a total zeroing out of the upstream emissions. It would still retain the upstream emissions associated with transportation and things like that. It would only zero out the upstream emissions associated with like the forest management and wood processing, or some of those parts that would have happened anyway, at least in theory. So, and then with, I guess before I move to wrap up, I did have one question for Brian, which is that a lot of when I reread the ANR issue briefing, a lot of it just seems to operate from the assumption that the pellets are made in Vermont. And I wasn't, that seems to really not hold. So I just wasn't sure, like, could you speak to what extent ANR's commentary, like, did ANR consider the possibility that some percentage of the pellets burned in Vermont are imported? And to what extent do any of the issue briefing perspectives hold in that case? Or were you intending to only comment on like Vermont produced and sourced products?
Well, I think it's what Matt Coda said. The pellet market is a very dynamic market, and the Forestry Division folks that helped me prepare that brief were making their informed assumptions regarding what the sources are of pellets. But I think we've all agreed here today that we need better data on what's the source, all of the wood feedstock that's being used in Vermont. We need better data on where it's coming from.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so then to kind of move us towards wrap up, I guess I would maybe slightly, so I agree with your statement, Rick, that there isn't like agreement on how to resolve what Ken said, like what should the GWP bio be like for wood fuels. Like we don't have the basis to provide a really clear recommendation on that. With that said, I think that's a somewhat different question than would we be comfortable conveying this document forward? I didn't necessarily see a pathway to resolving some of those questions, and this document really does not take a position on those controversial issues. It merely like kind of documents the state of affairs and some of the sources that could be used to make further progress.
I understand that, Emily. I'm actually, what I have in mind is Brian's comment that in at least one part of topic 2, the document seems to, at least in his view, conflate a number of issues, or at least the calculations and the relationships of a number of issues. And if that's the case, I'd like to get it correct before.
Yeah.
That was really definitely not the other, we're not going to make recommendations on actual numbers. Yeah. Emily Gruber.
Yeah, I think that's right. And that's also my concern, is just that I'm losing the actual term, but where it says, if we consider it a waste product, therefore GWP is 0, I think that's the problem that I have, at least.
Where does it say that?
Can you scroll up to wherever that number 2 was?
I think
actually, I
it's
think it's
actually
down.
down.
Yeah, sorry.
This,
It's yeah, the none of the forest harvesting is due to the feedstock, and therefore GWP's bio will be set to 0. I think the concern is that some of the upstream emissions would be set to 0, but that doesn't necessarily mean GWP bio would be set to 0 just because it's a residue.
Yeah, I guess
Yeah, and maybe that's not Brian's concern, but that was the conflation that I had heard, and that's the one that I had too.
yeah, it did seem like that's the way it was being interpreted, though, where like ANR's issue briefing said we think pellets are 100% waste, and then Opinion Dynamics in their second draft said, okay, well, if they're 100% waste, then GWP bio should be set to 0. So that was a link that they seemed to be making. Can you further explain why those two things are not linked? Because they seem to have made that.
Yeah, basically, so consider that you have a forest and you're chopping it down because you want lumber or something like that, and you have a bunch of waste that you then turn into pellets. The like chainsaws, whatever else that's being used to actually cut it down, sure, maybe you just allocate that to the lumber. But then if you go and burn the pellets later, they would not necessarily have been burned otherwise. They would have either stayed standing forest or become lumber or something like that. And so where those combustion emissions end up is really unclear if that gets set to 0. So it's kind of the same point that both Brian and Ken were also making. I think that there's different pockets of things that get allocated depending on whether they're considered residues or not. And that combustion piece gets a little hairy when you don't assume that all of it necessarily would have been combusted otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the calculation here is, or an edit here might be, there are 2 supporting assumptions that underpin how Opinion Dynamics calculated GWP bio, because this was not necessarily my recommendation, but more an observation of what they had actually done.
Yeah, and thank you for doing that. I think that would be helpful, is just to make it really clear that this is what OD has done and not necessarily what TAG is supporting.
Yeah.
Okay, Adam. And then I do want to move to resolving this. Adam.
Yeah, so I just wanted to point out that I think the reason that OD made that connection was because the WWF GWP bio calculator makes that connection. And that's a widely, international connection that's being made. So I don't think that was some editorializing on OD's part, but it's based on their use of that tool.
Thanks. Well, okay, Emily, you're asking the tag to vote to take a position on this document, okay? I'm wondering, I mean, we should, Catherine, I'll turn it to you, or, you know, how should we proceed? As I've suggested one way to proceed. But let's take the pulse of the tag.
Well, I think we need to be clear in the framing of the document as to what, I think Emily has made it clear in her explanation that the document is designed to just, well, document some of the discussions of the tag and some of the issues we see, and not any position of the tag. So I think that might need to be added to the front end overall, and make it clear that that's what we're endorsing here and nothing further.
That would be,
Am I comfortable with
at the
that?
front of question 2, though, right?
Well, in front of the whole thing. I don't think there's anything else. Well, there is one place where you say the tag does agree.
Yeah. so
There's
that's
actually a bunch of places even under number 2
right.
where
So-
I've tried to note that I think the tag like is fine with this, is fine with this.
Yeah.
It just seemed like for areas that we thought looked okay, it might be good to document that.
Yeah, Brian.
Yeah, I was just going to make that observation, and yeah, I don't know what the schedule is for this. I think advancing this in its current form is something that would be difficult for me to support. And like an issue summary that took out any recommendations from the tag sounds like it's more aligned with what the purpose of this is, but I don't know if those edits can be made, circulated, reviewed, and approved by the tag before. I mean, if these are not comments to opinion dynamics, which some of them are, I'm doing this in real time now. I would not object to like an issue summary, but I don't believe it would be, we would be submitting it to the PUC in time to be able to affect the final draft of the TRM by OD under their contract, which doesn't mean it's not worth doing, because as people have recognized, the idea is that this would be kind of a continuous process with those. But I think that for today, I think what I'm hearing is that we will need to revisit a revised version of this that is a summary and not a recommendation, and that addresses some of the issues that the groups discussed today.
Thank you, Brian. To my mind, I agree with that, because as we're going to discuss shortly, with respect to OD's responses to our questions, it's clear at this point that we're coming down to the wire, and that I think with a number of issues, we're really flagging them for ongoing review, consideration, and input to a living and changeable document. That's my sense. Others?
I guess I agree with the edit that Emily Grubert suggested. For Brian's hesitation, it's not clear to me what changes. I mean, the only place where I said the tag agrees with this were things for which there did not appear to me to be any disagreement that arose at any meeting. So maybe there are disagreements there. I just thought it might be useful to say, like, this makes sense. Or we could change that to, like, we did not identify any disagreements. Or I guess we could remove those little statements. I just thought it might be useful to sort of say, like, this generally made sense to the tag where we didn't have any objections arise. And then I guess it's not clear to me what changes would satisfy Brian. So I'm inclined to just, like, if we could, if there's any support, even if Brian can't sign on, if there was some support from other tag members, I would be in favor of just moving this along and putting it to bed rather than kind of dragging it on in some form, I guess.
Luce?
Hi, good morning. I just, I'm having a hard time on what I'm voting on.
Yeah.
The discussion seems very clear, assumptions, but it'd be nice to have had a list of what are the recommendations. This says discussion and recommendations. It's a good summary. We've had a lot of conversation. We've had a lot of different views. And we're hearing even today good information. I'm just not getting what the purpose of this is.
Yeah, I mean, maybe recommendations is really the wrong word, but it's really, that was entitled to it trying to be like, the tag agrees that this equation is appropriate to use. Like, I guess that's kind of a recommendation. I don't know. That was all I was thinking.
Brian?
Yeah, so we agreed upon a process very early on how the tag would be discussing and evaluating and making recommendations to the PUC. And it was, proposals were put together, they would be reviewed, we would vote on them, and 10 or more votes in the affirmative would indicate a strong recommendation from the tag. That is not this process that is being discussed right now. I understand what you're trying to do, Emily, provide information to the PUC. I get that, but this is, but we agreed on how we were going to do that much earlier in this process when we moved away from strictly using Robert's Rules of Order. And that's the reason why people use them, because you have rules and process that people operate under. This is worthwhile information for the PUC to have, but I'm uncomfortable with not going through the agreed upon process on a document that requires some edits on the schedule that we're on.
Thank you, Brian. Matt?
Oh, in another way of saying what Brian said, I would just say, why don't we just keep it to the summary? I mean, I'm not prepared to vote because I'm not quite sure what my recommendations are. So I don't want to say the tag agrees unanimously because I'm not even sure what that is. But I agree with I think this discussion is helpful, and I think the summary is good, just as long as there's not a language that says tag agrees. I'm willing to move on, but if there's going to be something that says tag agrees, I'm going to sort of pump the brakes, either abstain or just to reconsider at a later date.
Thank you. Brian, do you have another comment? Your hand's still up? Okay. Other members of the tag? Any thoughts?
No additional thoughts, just sharing that I would probably be abstaining from this vote.
Right. In light of some of the comments I've heard, I would be either abstaining or voting against approving it. We may want to just move on then and
Well, I'm wondering, we did have a proposal from Brian that it could be revised to take out all points of that state specifically the tag agrees with this or the tag likes this approach, and just reframe the document. And Brian, yeah, you can clarify, but reframe the document as just a summary of our discussions or briefings on the issues.
And a revision to the characterization, the technical characterization of upstream emissions versus GWP bio.
right.
I don't think we can do that today. I mean, you tell me, Chair Weston, do you want to use the committee's time to really get it in real time?
I don't, but this is a question for the tag as a whole, but at this point, I don't think that this would be a profitable use of our time.
How are we operating?
I said before,
should I make a motion to table this?
That would, I think that would, yes.
I motion to table this
Indefinitely or until
the next meeting.
Well, we'll be talking about what the next meeting is, but
Yeah, we
yes. And in the meantime, a revised document can be put together.
Yeah, I'm not going to revise it because I am not clear what all of you have problems with. Like, I guess it's just the little statements. The tag agrees with this, but I don't know. It's just, I feel a bit frustrated, honestly, because I'm not clear on what exactly is wrong.
Well, that's what discussion in a subgroup or individual discussions would But if you don't want to revise it, then we'll just, I'm not hearing.
I'm not opposed to someone else revising it. I just don't
Oh.
want it to be assigned to me.
Well, okay, well then we can work on that offline, but I'm not hearing enthusiasm for taking a vote on this document as it currently stands. Or
Or a second
enthusiasm
on my
for-
motion either, so.
Pardon me?
Or
No.
a second on my motion to table, so I don't know where we are.
I second it. I second the motion to table.
We
And
actually,
the move table, this is Thomas Weiss, the move to table is not discussable.
thanks, Tom, but please, we haven't asked for comment from the public.
I'm just trying to get parliamentary procedure down straight.
Fine, but thank you. Okay, we've had a motion to table and it's been seconded, although we haven't required seconds previously. I'll take a vote on that. All in favor signify by raising their hands.
Well, I'll just say,
Oh.
we have
What did I
found
do wrong now?
hands is not adequate because it doesn't show
Yes.
up on recording. So we'd actually have to take a voice vote of each of the members.
Yes.
And I can bring up the list of the members and go through them one at a time. And I would just ask, I'll try to record it at the same time. Let's see, hold on. Got too many documents open right now.
Can I just clarify? It seemed like everyone was in support of the question 1. So this is just question 2 that we're tabling.
No, we're tabling the entire document because everything is in the single document. We haven't split the document yet. And that's
Well,
how,
is that an option? Because I think,
well, not at this point.
Okay.
We've already got a motion. But it could be an option when we come back, when you come back with 2 documents, perhaps. Or someone comes back with 2 documents, yes.
So I'm going to ask for a vote. The vote is on the question of, or the vote is on the recommendation that the tag table this document until it is brought back in a future meeting. Is that the correct wording? And obviously some work will have to be done in between to make that happen. I'm going to go through the list as I have it written in mind. So Rick Weston,
I vote in favor of tabling.
Emily Levin,
oppose.
Jared is with us.
Abstain.
Okay. Hold on. All right, Alec, is Alec here, or Matthew, are you in his stead?
Yeah, I'll vote in his stead to table.
Brian
In favor.
of tabling, yes. Matt Coda,
Yes.
okay, in favor. Emily Roscoe,
In favor?
okay, Luce Hillman, Luce
Yes,
Hillman,
sorry, in favor of tabling.
Ken Jones,
Yes.
Sam with us?
Yes. Thanks, Catherine.
Michelle?
Yes, in favor of tabling.
Right. Casey,
Yes, table.
Emily Gruber,
Abstain.
abstain. Okay, then it passes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9.
Catherine.
Miss somebody?
Yes.
Oh, Floyd. Thank you. You're on my list somewhere. I just jumped over you. Floyd.
Yes, in favor.
Okay, thank you. 10. Floyd in favor of tabling, one against, and 2 abstain.
Yeah, and Patrick couldn't make it to the meeting today because he had family, kids were sick.
Okay. So thank you for humoring me for that. So we have a record. Okay. We're on to the TRM then. Let me stop sharing.
Yeah, we're really at a breaking point. We were going to take a break at after the discussion of the TRM. We've gone over. I would suggest taking a 5-minute break here and then starting in. Does that make sense, Catherine?
Absolutely. That'll probably better timing. All right, so we'll be back at 3 minutes after, 2 minutes after the hour. Talk to
Yep.
y'all then.
Thanks. Mr. Weiss, your phone is not muted. You may want to do that.
if folks could turn your video back on so we know we've got enough of you to restart the meeting. And Rick, would you like me to just bring up the document with the responses? Or do you want to have the discussion first of whether or not we want to even talk about it?
I'll bring it up, but let's, I mean, that's the first question is whether we even want to talk about it. I'm sure folks will have, I suspect some folks will have some things to say. Non-tag members, we ask that you keep your video off.
Okay.
Okay, we all set? Well, welcome back. This agenda item has been undone because Opinion Dynamics can't be here today. And we were setting aside some time to have a discussion with them about the responses to our questions, which you received only yesterday, and we're sorry about that. I hope you had a chance to look at them. But the first question then is, do we have something to discuss? And are there, is there an action that we would take as a consequence of that discussion? I'm not, for my own self, I don't know that there is such an action that we would be able to take, certainly today, which would mean in time for Opinion Dynamics to, consider what we have to say. If you've had a chance to go through the document, you'll see that at the very start, and Deirdre mentioned this earlier, their plan, Opinion Dynamics plan is, amongst other things, when they submit the final work product, their final work product to the PUC, is to include a list of issues that are amenable to further revision. And in fact, as all issues in the TRM are, for refinement and revision over time as the program progresses. So I think, so certainly a number of the issues that we've raised would be included in that list. And of course, we always have the opportunity to tell the PUC that we think a particular issue is should be looked at again and revised, changed, or whatever. So with that in mind, the question for us is there a discussion now that we want to have about the TRM and Opinion Dynamics' responses to our questions? Which, as you'll notice, in certain cases, they came back to us to, explain that where they think we misunderstood what they were doing. Does anyone have any thoughts?
Yeah, do we want to take a sort of a general sense of if people are ready, if people have reviewed it and people, because we have nobody to actually explain the responses, are people, here are just like, I guess, a raising of hands as to who has had the opportunity to review it. I'm going to stop sharing because I can't see you all without doing that.
Okay.
Who has had a chance to review it and, has specific questions they'd like to discuss?
Well, that's two things. I've reviewed it.
You have nothing to discuss?
Well,
Okay.
maybe not, but that's fine.
All right, I'm trying to get over here. So we have 1, 2, 3. A few who have and a few who have not. I don't know if it's worth.
I would say let's hear what the folks who've raised their hands have to say and see if there's something that we should take up. So I'll start with Sam and then Floyd.
Thanks, Rick. So I'll make this quick. I think overall appreciate OD's responses to the questions, and I'll just stick to the renewable gas items mainly. Most of it makes a lot of sense to me. There's just some cases where I think the answer is completely unacceptable. I mean, for example, where they can't explain why the CI scores here are different than the CI scores in other programs. Seems like at minimum, they should be looking at other program CI scores when developing this and have some sort of response to that, right? I mean, that one sort of worries me a bit. That's probably the main one. I noted that on their answer to the declining CIs, they said it's a matter of efficiency, and they're assuming something like a 3% efficiency increase year over year. I mean, at this point, for the purposes of this analysis and how it will be used by the PUC, I think that's okay. But if we were going to do a more detailed and realistic analysis, I would want a little bit more out of that. But again, I think that's okay here. But I do want to know why the CI scores are different. I think it's worrisome to me that they can't answer that question.
Thanks, Sam. Just remind, I didn't get all the very first thing you said. CI scores in particular for what did you say?
So I noted, and
I just missed it when you.
Yeah. I noted that at least for RNG, the CI scores are a lot different than in most cases than what we've seen in other programs, which essentially should have the same inputs, right?
Okay.
We proposed that it may have been because of a different value that Argonne is planning to update. And I understand why they're not able to update that yet. I think that's okay. But they said that they couldn't provide an answer as to why the CI scores were substantially different.
Okay, thanks. Lloyd?
Yeah, so I had two items that were of interest to me. And I felt that the OD responses were inadequate. The first one is number 2 on distillers corn oil. I would note that Clean Fuels submitted a comment letter. I don't know to what extent OD has had a chance to look at that, but they point out that OD's allocation to the ethanol part of the process is at variance with not just the West Coast jurisdictions and how they do that system boundary determination, but also with the federal 40B incentive guidance for SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel, in which this pathway of using distillers corn oil is specifically spelled out in there as allocating it to the corn oil itself and not to ethanol. So it's at variance with both the states that are doing this sort of analysis as well as the federal government. So just wanted to point that out and see what OD's response to that is. And then on the renewable propane, again, it's not something that I'm heavily involved with, but the response still doesn't make sense to me. I mean, just from a logic flow, if renewable propane is a byproduct of the renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuel production, even if you only have one fuel pathway that's registered, that's not determinative of the conclusion that OD put out there, which is to keep the CI flat. If the renewable diesel is going to decrease in CI over time, because renewable propane is a byproduct of that process, it should go down proportionately as well, in line with that reduction in CI for the RD.
Thanks, Floyd. Any other thoughts on this? Dr. Brown.
Sorry, I'm apparently clapping and I can't figure out how to stop clapping, so sorry about that. So getting used to these new reactions here. Just want to note what Sam was talking about with the differences in the CI scores compared to what we've seen in other jurisdictions. So I went pretty deeply into the GREET model that they're using, and they are sticking with the default GREET model assumptions. Now, many cases, I think that's perfectly appropriate. When it comes to the animal manure CI scores, however, they are assuming approximately 60% flaring under their baseline assumptions. So any existing manure management system, they're assuming 60% of those flare or capture methane and flare it. EPA data shows that number is actually closer to 3% across the US, and that's actually declined from 12%, a high of 12% about a decade ago, to 3% now. So if anything, it's moving the opposite direction. So I know they want to get in touch, OD that is, wants to get in touch with Argonne, just get some additional clarification about that pending change, when that's going to happen. But I do think this is a value that you can use a, Vermont specific value, or, the locations near Vermont where this would potentially be sourced. It is one of the single largest impacts RNCI based on the default GREET model assumptions that they're using. So just want to note that, since that is one of the major differences, or a cause of the major differences that we're seeing with the CI scores in other jurisdictions. Thank you.
I want to make sure I got it right. Was it 60% what? What was that percentage of?
So they are currently assuming that 60% of the manure management operations, so dairy farms, et cetera, are capturing biogas that is being produced naturally and flaring it. The actual number, according to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in the U.S., is about 3%. So pretty big difference between what they're assuming, and this is GREET's default assumption. I don't want to say that OD put that in there on their own, but pretty big difference between that assumption and what the actual data shows.
So if I understand your point, then that if it is in fact 3%, then you would say there's a much greater opportunity for avoided methane from that
Correct.
process.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Any other folks want to jump in? Any questions? My thought here is, my immediate thought is that there's nothing at this point that the tag can do to, respond to OD. Certainly, individual members of the tag, as parties to the process, can file something with the PUC if you'd like to get those points across. Deirdre's hearing them, but I don't know that that's an informal response is what we should rely on. I don't think we're going to be prepared to, in the time we have, draft up another document to say we still don't understand. We still think there's something else going on there. But I guess I'd leave it at that. Are there any other thoughts? Emily Roscoe.
Yeah, just some feedback from Ben Plotzker, not on this, but on the TRM in general. We just wanted to flag again that the full load hours for heat pumps hadn't been addressed from our knowledge. So just wanted to flag that for the tag, the department, or Opinion Dynamics if they review this recording.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay, well, we should move on then to the next agenda item, which is the PUC's order on early action credits. If you've seen the order, came out in November. We sent it around again. The PUC is asking the tag. Take a look at the end of the if you can pull that up, Catherine, that'd be great. At the end of the order, they're asking if we agree with their approach to the early action credit methodology as outlined in that order of November 19th. The question that I would put to the tag is what we want to do is actually determine whether we agree, or if we don't, is there any member of the tag who would recommend that we consider an alternative methodology? I'll start actually there. If folks think that there's something else that the PUC should do, are you prepared to recommend it and ask us to take a vote on it? Ken?
Yeah, it may not get to the point of a vote, but there's just one, I'll say, discouraging aspect in this, which is that the registration process not begin until after the legislature approves to the rule. You know, we already have evidence that I'll say a lack of understanding of how many credits are currently available. It's not showing up in any of the analysis. People are speculating as to 23 and 24 in terms of credit availability, and that would be resolved if they started a registration process earlier. Yeah, I mean, if the tag wants to vote to tell the Public Utility Commission they should start the registration process, I would support that. I will understand if others won't, but that's the one thing that comes up. I know the other question that posed in the agenda is, should credits be valued any differently? I don't see any basis for valuing credits any differently. So hopefully that one's easy for us. But the one that I would propose is the registration process should begin as soon as possible, so that we can have a better information base with regards to the existing the number of existing credits as we go forward.
I expected to hear that from you, Ken. Let me ask you this question. Do you consider that the methodology that's being that the PUC is describing in this order includes the registration process? Is that a part of it?
It's been a few days since I've looked at this. I thought they had in here that the process for registration would not take place until after the legislature approves the rule.
That's true. What I'm asking though is the methodology for early action credit ownership inclusive of a registration process? This is a
Yeah, I think so. I have to find the specific language, but they talk about having entities that will own these early action credits. There is language in here that does talk about that process, and it's the registration process that identifies those entities and therefore identifies the credits. And it's in here, and it's
yeah. Okay, so you're
yeah, I mean, it's fine. And that's part of the reason for getting started. It may not be a perfect system, but just like the registration process of obligated parties, by going through that, it highlights those things that need to be changed. That's another reason to get this started.
So you would say then that to respond to the PUC's request for a tag statement on this order, that you'd break it into two responses. One is, how do we feel about the valuation methodology? That's number one. And number two is, how do we feel about the registration process? That's number.
Correct. So valuation, I think we might be able to agree. Let's use the same valuation as we would for credits that are not early action credits, because there is no basis for doing anything else. So I think that one's going to be easy for us, and the other one is start the registration process as soon as possible, rather than wait until the legislature approves the rule. That one may be a little more challenging for us.
Okay, thank you. Any thoughts on Ken's proposal to bifurcate our response? Or any other thoughts? are folks prepared to say how they feel about the 2 points that Ken is raising? The valuation methodology, and then there's the registration process. Brian?
Yeah, sorry, Ken, I'm gonna have to ask you to repeat that because I was looking for the part of the document that talked about registration. So there's two there, we're considering 2 proposals.
Right.
And I mean,
First one's the easy one, and it's kind of where this page 5 thing is. Should the tag advise a different valuation methodology for early action credits? I would suggest that we say the answer to that question is no. That's, I
Which
think,
is to say we agree with what the PUC is proposing.
okay.
correct. And
And
then
then
the second
regarding-
thing that I'm introducing is rather than delay the registration process until approval of the legislature of the rules, that the registration of credits should begin as soon as possible.
Okay.
Because, well, we don't need to go.
Yeah, I understand why. I'm just reading, it's on PF page 4. It sounds like this says that we've already recommended that.
And we have, that's right.
So why would we do it again?
We can reiterate our recommendation because we don't like their decision.
I disagree with their findings that the timing. I'm not sure why timing, what they mean by that. I mean, it has to start when it has to start. Resources. This is a request that goes out. I mean, I've had informal discussions with some of the major players that will be registering this. They've been prepared to be doing this for the last 9 months. We've had discussions that, they just haven't done it because they haven't been told to. But most of the effort is by those folks that are going to be filing the registration. Once the PUC receives the registration, yeah, they're gonna have to decide what they're gonna do with it. They don't have to do anything with it until indeed the legislation is approved, or the rules are approved by the legislature. But at least having that information come in, it requires them to put out an order. That's what it requires. How much resource is that? With a staff of 3 people dedicated to the clean heat standard and the other work at the PUC, I would hope they could pull that off. So I take those impracticable factors and say they didn't provide me any information that suggested that those were actually impractical.
Thanks. I want to go back to the valuation methodology, just so folks know what we're talking about. The PUC says that the early action, the value of early action credits should be treated, should be no different than the value of later credits. That's the essential point there, that there's no difference in value, which had been our recommendation as well. Okay, we have an informal proposal. We don't have a motion yet to bifurcate this question. If that were the case, then we would have a motion on something to the effect of the tag agrees with the PUC's approach to valuing early action credits as outlined in the interim order of November 19th. And presumably the second one would be Ken's wording. The tag recommends that the PUC initiate the registration process as soon as possible.
Let's start with the first one, and I will make the motion that that we agree with the PUC conclusion with regards to the valuation of credit of early action credits to be the same as whatever the alternative to early action credits is.
Would it be just simpler to say the tag agrees with the PUC's approach to valuing early action credits as outlined
Yes.
in the interim order dated November 19th, 2024?
Yes, thank you.
Before I go to you, Luce, we got a motion. I'm going to take a second on it on this one, just so that there's no question about parliamentary procedure. Is there a second?
And the motion is simply to bifurcate these two decisions points.
No, the motion is on the first point.
Right, the
Simply on
motion
value.
is is on the valuation of credits.
Okay.
Is there a
Thanks.
second?
Do you want to take comment before you have the final vote?
Well, I don't have a second. I've asked for a second in this one. This is interesting. No one wants to second the motion.
Can you repeat the motion?
The motion is the TAG agrees with the PUC's approach to valuing early action credits as outlined in the interim order dated November 19th, 2024. And that's the motion. And what that means is that we agree with what the PUC is saying. And what the PUC is saying is that there'll be the same value, that early action credits will be valued the same way as later credits. They'll be just the same. And which is, by the way, something we recommended earlier.
And I apologize to Ken. We're saying this because there is another document or another sentiment that says this is not happening.
No, they've asked us to weigh in on their order. They really, what they want to know is if we think there's a different valuation methodology, and we don't, and I haven't heard anyone propose one.
When you say valuation, I'm looking at discussion is ownership of credits. Where is I'm missing this somehow. There's ownership and then there's registration of early action credits. Am I looking at the right memo? I don't see a
November 19th.
value. When you say value, what are you discussing here?
Let me pull up.
Are you not seeing the?
I'm
wanna
on the
see where-
November 19th. So where does it say, oh, wait a minute, maybe I'm not on the right one. I don't see value. Okay. Oh, is this the one the page was missing? No.
This is no, it shouldn't be a page. It's only 5 pages.
Okay, sorry, then can you scroll back to the value? I'm sorry,
Let
Catherine.
me find out just where it is.
Legal standard discussion, that's the ownership.
Ownership.
Registration, where is value in here?
Value.
Here it is. It's at the very, how did I?
Right there.
Okay,
I'm looking
it's at
for
the
it.
Bottom, got it. It's at the. it's at-
Value of early action credits,
Yeah,
right?
the heading is at the very bottom of page 4.
Okay,
But the
sorry
text
about
is
that.
in page 5.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Sorry, Luz. Okay, I did ask for a second on this motion and I haven't heard one, so. How intriguing.
I believe that means that it is tabled. It is not even tabled. There will be no vote.
Well, let me just ask one question. Am I allowed to second it? As chair? I haven't seconded motions. I don't know what the parliamentary rule on that is.
You're a tag member. I would assume so. Deirdre can correct us.
Well, then I second it because I want to have this discussion.
So do you want to take any public comment before we take a vote or a discussion? Or do you want to have the discussion?
Is there anything anybody wants to say? Seems to be no enthusiasm for this question, even though we've already spoken on it. And the PUC is merely asking us if we have an alternative methodology. If we approve this motion, we would be saying, no, we don't have an alternative methodology on valuation that we recommend. That's how I read all this. Are there any thoughts from TAG members?
Emily Gruber?
Yeah, I guess the thing that I'm a little unclear on is whether what we're voting on is that we full-heartedly support what they're doing versus we don't have an alternative. So maybe that's my hesitation to second.
Well, in this case, Emily, you're right. We are voting to say we agree with it. That's what the motion says. Okay, before we vote, I will take public comment on this one. Again, we've been through this before, but are there any members of the public who? Ms. Smith?
Yeah, I put this in the chat, but having read many PUC orders, they're take it literally. If you advise that they adopt a different valuation methodology, they want to hear from you. But you're not advising a different methodology, so I don't think that this is worth your time and that you don't need to weigh in on it.
Thank you. Mr. Porter?
Yeah, I have some comments and questions about the last subject regarding TRM and wood, so I don't know if it's appropriate to make those now or
Not here.
not. Okay.
Not here.
Then no, I don't have any comments or questions.
Thank you. Okay. With that in mind, actually, Ms. Smith makes she makes a point. Let's see how the vote goes, but we've already made our recommendation on this point. So fair enough. Okay. With that in mind, no more discussion. All in favor of the motion signify by, well, we're going to take the vote, person by person. Catherine, I turn it over to you.
Yeah, and I'm going to put this, just so we're all clear on what we're voting on. The TAG agrees that the PUC's approach to early action credit methodology is outlined in the interim order dated November 19th, 2024.
No, valuation methodology.
Okay.
What we actually said was the value, well, put it up, but let's.
It's asking about a different valuation methodology, so I took it directly from the order.
Well.
Is that what we're?
Can we see what you put up? Because that's not what we said orally just now. I don't.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hit post. There you go.
Okay. Actually, what was said was the TAG agrees with the PUC's approach to valuing early action credits as outlined in the interim order dated. That's actually what was said orally.
Okay, then let me correct that.
Okay.
I just want to be sure that everybody knows what we're voting on here.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Correct approach to valuing, if I got everything spelled right, early action credits outline. Okay. Yes, so let me get my list up. Rick Weston.
Aye, I'm in favor.
Okay. Emily Levin.
Aye.
Jared. Jared still with us?
Yep, he is, but he's up. There he goes.
Did you hear me? I said it. I abstain.
Okay. Matthew.
Coda.
No, Baker Poll.
I also abstain.
Brian.
Abstain.
Matt Coda.
Nay.
Emily Roscoe.
Abstain.
Luce.
Yes.
Ken Jones.
Yes.
Patrick's not with us. Floyd.
Abstain.
Sam Lair.
Yes.
Michelle had to leave. Casey,
Yes.
Emily Gruber,
Abstain.
and I think that's it. Yes. Did I miss anybody this time? Okay, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in favor. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 abstaining and 1 no.
Okay, that is not a strong majority. So that ends that one.
Okay, take up Ken's second suggestion.
Ken, do you want to make another
My
motion?
Excuse me, Rick?
Do you want to make a motion on?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion that we recommend to the PUC that they, I'll say, reconsider their decision with regards to the registration of credits, noting that the reasons why they said taking the registration earlier would, and if you could scroll up, would they concluded that the recommendation is impractical due to timing, resources, and the absence of an adopted clean heat standard. We don't believe that timing, we do not believe that timing is a factor, that the process has to begin at some point. We do not believe the resources necessary to put an order out for the initiation of the registration process is onerous. And because of those factors, we don't believe that their decision to delay the registration facilitates the implementation of the clean heat standard.
Well, that's awfully wordy. So any way to shorten that?
I'm hoping it can be shortened.
Well, do you have a suggestion for doing so?
So I've been trying to write it out. I have PAG recommends that the PUC reconsider its decision regarding the registration of credits. And then we have reference to all of its reasonings or its 2 reasonings. So can we shorten that to say, based on the tags?
Based on lack of evidence that those reasons are supported?
Well, okay. I mean, earlier you had said, Ken, you know, the tag, you know, urges the PUC to begin the registration process as soon as possible. That, of course, would be, they can interpret that however they want, I suppose. So what is it you now want us to say, that we just disagree with their reasoning, that we don't think, well, as you say, there's no evidence for it. Do we? Well, okay. Moose.
Or do we just want to put a date in here? I'm imagining the goal would be to collect the data, Ken, so that we have data, so we know what we're looking at for existing credits, right? And I'm guessing the PUC doesn't have the manpower to pull that together, because we're going to want to know how many early action credits have been registered, right? As this moves along.
And right, we could put a date that because what it requires is them to put out an order. And we could say, we want you to put out the order, let's say January 5th, 2025. And that is the effort they need to make. Okay. And then the entities that will be registering can respond to that order. Okay. What they do with that registration information, granted, this is going to be taking place during the time when they're going to be testifying to the legislature, maybe. But the point is that if they don't do it then, they will wait until probably May or June to put out an order for registration. And in terms of timing, that delays their understanding and therefore the default delivery agent's understanding of what credits are available, which delays the default delivery agent's ability to put together a budget, And I don't think that's necessary. And again, the resources necessary to initiate the order are, I think, well within the ability of the staff of the PUC between now and the next 3 or 4 weeks.
I just think there's more to it because we're going to want to know what is the value of these early action credits, and it's going to take some work to use the TRM and actually understand. So you have good data, right? That's all. I understand why they're concerned. I think
And that, but that effort is the requirement of those folks who are registering the credits. And you're right. They have to use the TRM as it currently exists. You're right in that.
Which is a challenge. It's not an easy, we had asked for an easy spreadsheet. It's not like that. It's challenging for people. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about.
Understand. But again, if not, then waiting until May or June to begin the process makes the work of the default delivery agent, which you folks may know that I was the only one to submit actually to the RFI and the other docket here, because I believe that the current process is inoperable because the schedule is so delayed. And this is one way to accelerate the implementation. And without it, it makes the effort of the default delivery agent almost impossible.
Right.
Can I ask a clarifying question, Ken? Or Rick? Or Ken?
Oh, yeah, by all means, Matt.
So, just so I'm sure what language we're talking about, you're talking about the registration of credits of obligated parties or of any credit generator?
Any credit generator.
And this is the universe of credits that have taken place since January 1 of 2023.
Correct.
At this point, Ken, isn't this as much as anything a registration of what people have done, and the number of credits they get for what they've done is still up in the air because we don't have a TRM?
We do have a draft TRM, and that will be the basis of folks to file. And again, I know that if this is delayed further, the questions posed about applying the TRM to the registration process will be challenging. They will be just as challenging in May as they will be in January.
Right.
So are we still in discussion period?
Well, in fact, we actually don't have a motion yet.
All right.
Yeah,
Well,
but go ahead.
Well, I understand what Ken's saying now better. Thank you for that clarification. But I would also say, and I also understand the challenge to the DDA. And I understand there are some credit generators that would like to get it down on paper. But there are also a lot of credit generators that are small businesses that are about to hit the busy season for the next 6 months. It doesn't matter how much I scream and yell about how get your credits in, they're not going to do it. And just like the registration, which you are legally bound to do if you're an obligated party, you're not obligated bound. If you save a ton of CO2, you don't have to tell anyone. You just do it. But if you sell fuel, you are. We're at 30% compliance rate for that with a $10,000 fine. And now we're heading into winter. We're asking all these small little credit generators to produce documents for a program that may or may not exist in 6 months. I sympathize with the DDA's plight, but I don't care as much. So I'll be voting no.
Okay. Let's see, we're still in the process here of even putting together a motion.
I will withdraw the motion. I just want the minutes to note that Ken Jones disagreed entirely with the fact that it's impracticable to initiate the registration process. Just because I realize, yeah, I certainly won't get, we won't get this motion approved. I understand that. We probably won't even get it seconded. But again, that conclusion that they can't move forward is one that I disagree with, and is, I think, indicative of the inability to move forward on many parts of the clean heat standard, which the tag probably is not going to be dealing with.
Okay, well, thank
So
you
I'm
for that.
withdrawing the motion. Thanks for allowing me to waste the time.
No, it's not a waste. This is, all these discussions are important. I mean, we are struggling with so many issues as all the discussions today have shown. So I'm sympathetic, all the way around. When we meet again, and we'll talk about this shortly, which I'm proposing will be in January at some point, we can review the minutes to make sure and see if, and add your point if it's not there, Ken, but yes. Okay. Well, that's that with this item on the agenda. Now we're going to turn to Jared Ulmer. Jared, you've revised your memo. Hope folks have had a chance to look at it. The question is, I mean, there are two questions that we're being asked to consider. I think first, whether there's agreement on the content of the memo, and two, how it should be framed in forwarding to the PUC, if we agree. And there's some process recommendations here as well. The tag periodic review should align with the PUC's biennial review of consequences, and calculating public health benefits and impacts requires dedicated funding and expertise. We say should be assigned to a consultant or a state agency, performed in tandem with the first review of consequences, and that our role should be to advise on methodology and review results similar to the process with a technical consultant and potential study consultant. So Jared, I'm going to turn it to you to lead the discussion. We've got about 20 minutes we've allocated to it. Let's see where it takes us.
Thanks, Rick. Can you hear me
Thank
okay?
you. Yes.
I will probably defer to Emily to say anything more if she chooses to about some of the process recommendations that came out of the subgroup meeting. I'm just going to focus on the updated memo, which I think was circulated on Monday. And I'm just going to kind of walk through some of the changes and highlights. Hopefully folks that are interested had a chance to review in advance. And I don't know if it's helpful for, Catherine or anyone else to share. So I'll pause for a second in case there's a desire to share.
I do have it up.
Yep.
Share. Let me just get the right document. A lot of documents up here. Updated public health. Huh, is this it? Standard health considerations, here you go. Is that right?
Thank you. So page 1 is essentially the same as it was before. It's just trying to remind anyone reading this what the ask for the tag was in terms of reviewing public health implications and just some general language from the law itself about the aims to protect public health among other impacts. So we can go to page 2. Page 2 was the one that sort of teed up some of the process questions. I think we have dealt with those, and instead of having process questions, that page is deleted and we can make process recommendations somewhere else. So page 2 is now an executive summary based on the revised memo. Hopefully the one pager that perhaps oversimplifies some concepts that are explained in more detail below, but trying to make sure that the key takeaway points are conveyed in a short format. So, the introduction basically just says what this is and is not, and it is an attempt to summarize and express the health implications of end use of clean heat, installed measures and fuels. it is not about analyzing life cycle health impacts, and that's not because we don't think it's important. We comment on that further below that we think it is important, but it's taken us this long to get to this stage with the memo about end use, and expanding that to life cycle is a large undertaking that I don't think is realistic to take on at this point in time. Rick also mentioned, and we had previously discussed, that quantifying the health impacts in terms of costs is also not realistic to take on with tag resources at this time. So there are recommendations below about dedicating future resources to address both of those topics, the life cycle analysis and the monetization of health impacts. So focusing on just end use, based on the available literature and relevance to comparing different clean heat measures to modern equivalents, there's 3 takeaway statements here. One is that there's the clearest evidence that public health is protected, to use the terminology in the law, through building envelope improvements and electrification strategies, largely by reducing harmful combustion emissions and providing other health co-benefits. The second statement is about liquid and gaseous biofuels, acknowledging that this is a very under-researched topic in modern applications comparing to fuels in current use today. Trying to note that there's a lot of variation that's described in much more detail below, but the high-level takeaway is that in most cases, liquid and gaseous biofuels may provide a similar or slightly less harmful impact than the comparable fossil fuels in current use. The third takeaway is that wood heating basically always produces more harmful health impacts than comparable heating fuels. There's a lot of variation by type of equipment and fuel, but the net impact is generally always negative if replacing fossil fuels with wood fuels. So those are the 3 high-level takeaways. A note at the bottom too, to just clearly acknowledge that having equitable and affordable access to heat is paramount for protecting health. So, despite any differences between types of heating fuels, ensuring that equity and affordability is really critical. And then in terms of recommended next steps, these are really brief. I mean, these can certainly be expanded upon or added to. I know, Rick, you had a list from the subgroup meeting that could be blended in here if that's appropriate. But, in short, recommending a process for continuing to review and integrate emerging literature is number 1. And then 2 and 3 relate to dedicating resources to life cycle assessment and to a cost impact analysis in the future. So that's the high level executive summary. I'll maybe just give an overview of the rest of the document and then pause to see if there's any input. Catherine, can you go to the next page?
Certainly.
Thank you. So page 3 just goes into a little bit more detail about the method and how evidence is considered, and provide some detail about why the biofuel section below is approached with a very different level of detail and rigor than other sections of the document, which was largely due to the scientific uncertainty for that topic, which is not the case with the other 3 groupings of topics that we addressed. So then below that is the sections broken out by these groupings of building envelope strategies and electrification strategies. I don't think anything in there has changed substantively since the prior version. Similar with wood heating, there may have been 1 or 2 additional statements added at the bottom. but I don't think anything otherwise substantively changed here. I think that any additions might be on the next page. I can't remember if these showed up in previous versions, but I think it's just the last statement, which was suggested to me that any price increases affecting fossil fuels, at least historically, based on historical evidence, leads to increased use of wood heating, which could have a negative impact on health. And then section 4 is the one that is substantially revised based on all of the feedback that we previously heard. There is a more detailed intro section kind of describing the challenges of reviewing this literature and how we prioritize different sources or weighted different sources for consideration in the synthesis. And as we've discussed, there are extremely few studies looking at use of various biofuels in home heating applications, and particularly comparing them to, at least in the case of biodiesel, comparing to ultra low sulfur diesel that is exclusively used in home heating today, as opposed to older, higher sulfur diesel fuels. There are a fair number, at least more, automotive engine studies, particularly about biodiesel, that provide some information if they're also comparing to low sulfur fuels in use today. So we did consider those where it seemed like the relative differences between using a biofuel and a fossil fuel add some information that could be gleaned and relevant to the home heating situation. And then the bottom note essentially just states that there are some studies comparing biofuels to fuels that are no longer in use today, and it's hard to glean much relevant information from those. Okay, if you can go to the next page. There's just some statements about uncertainty that most literature reviews about biofuels, and including a peer-reviewed process that the EPA went through, routinely goes through, conclude the level of uncertainty and unanswered questions in the research about biofuels and health impacts. So just trying to acknowledge that uncertainty. And a specific bullet about the ABT Associates literature review. It seems like they were asked to conduct a pretty similar exercise to what we're doing. So I think that literature review is worth noting. They reviewed the literature in a similar way as we did for most of the same types of fuels and arrived at fairly similar conclusions, particularly about the lack of relevant literature in the residential heating sector. And then we have, in the A through, I think, E sections that follow, we have broken out the literature into, fuel specific categories, going into far more detail about what the literature says, where the areas of uncertainty are. Most of this is focused on biodiesel because that is where there is relatively more available literature, but again, largely related to transportation engine studies. And then there are relatively short sections on the other types of biofuels because there's just not much information out there. So I'm at risk of oversimplifying in my explanation here, but I can't go through all the details in each of these sections other than, restating the high level takeaway of, I don't think there are any super concerning definitive red flags about health impacts of biofuels. Most studies show similar impacts to their comparable fossil fuels. I think there are definitely studies that show some potentially marginal improvements. There were large improvements shown in earlier studies comparing higher sulfur fuels, but there's just not much evidence about whether those benefits hold up compared to ultra low sulfur fuels. And there are some flags for concern in the literature that where contradictory findings have been found and there's a need for more research, but there's nothing, definitively harmful that's been determined from the literature that I would, really want to call attention to. There's nothing else changed at the bottom. I do want to point out that the section is cited now. So there is the kind of general references section that's on the next page that we had previously. It's, cleaned up for the biofuels to make sure that we're actually referencing the documents that were used in this report. But then there are also the actual like numeric citations at the bottom that align to the biofuel section. So I will stop there.
Well, thank you, Jared. I really appreciate the work that you and Emily Levin and others have done on this. This is a long and detailed document that, as I understand it, as you say, it's a summary of the literature review, identifies where health benefits and impacts might reside, but does not make any recommendations with respect to how they should be treated for the purposes of the clean heat standard, but does recommend, as you say, 3 steps for the PUC to take in order to do so. Is that a fair summary of the document?
And I do think you flagged, one of our potentially unanswered questions is, does the TAG want to make any specific recommendations based on the current review of health impacts on how the PUC should treat different fuels or measures?
Right. I'm betting we don't at this point, but that's certainly a question. But the first question with this document is this a document that I think is this question? Oh, first of all, is Emily or anyone else have anything to add about the document? I please speak up. But the question I think we're asking, that we are asking is the TAG comfortable with advancing this document as it is to the PUC for its purpose, which is to describe where the literature on these issues stands and recommend processes for further address of health benefits and impacts. I'll start with Emily Levin, then go to Floyd.
Just super briefly, I just wanted to note that I believe, and we'll talk about this more when we get to your status report, Rick, but I believe you've also tried to incorporate some of the more like here's what we've done and here's what we haven't done with respect to review of consequences and sort of potential next steps are also to some degree incorporated into the chair's status report. So I just wanted to note that for folks as another potential venue to discuss some of, although I do see there are a few process steps included in this document as well. So I just wanted to note that. And then I also wanted to acknowledge Nora Travis. This is actually an extraordinary amount of work to review all this literature and a lot of people found new sources, which Jared and Nora reviewed. So I just wanted to acknowledge Nora's contributions to that.
Thank you. Floyd, then Sam, and then Dr. Brown.
Yeah, thanks. So thank you to Jared, Emily, and Nora for the additional information and details and references. I found those very helpful to kind of focus my thoughts. I previously conveyed some concerns with respect to the use of the vehicular focus studies and extrapolating those to heating sectors. To the extent that we're going to do that or have that in the document, I have a couple of points. One is I think a literature search like this is useful, but it can't be the only thing that PUC considers, right? I mean, the language that's cited from the statute is that, the clean heat standard be designed and implemented, among other things, to protect public health. So to me, there's kind of a forest, versus the trees sort of thing here. We're seeing all of these different studies, but we don't really attempt to address how these biofuels, and I'll speak to biodiesel and renewable diesel specifically, how these are being viewed by the agencies and NGOs that are specifically charged with with protecting public health. So I'll cite 3 examples. One is US EPA. Biodiesel has been registered for legal sale with the EPA and has been designated an advanced biofuel under the Renewable Fuel Standard since 2008. And EPA has been studying this fuel since 2002, at least. So over 2 decades worth of studies. They've concluded so far total toxics reduces carbon monoxide, particulates, sulfates, hydrocarbons, and air toxics. And that has not changed. Okay. And I understand they do these biennial reviews, but the upshot is they have not changed their position on that. Similar to American Lung Association, the preeminent non-governmental organization for air pollution causes, they have designated biodiesel as a clean air choice under their Clean Air Choice program, identifying reduction in PM, air toxics, and life cycle CO2 emissions. And then finally, I would point out that the state of California, back in 2015, concluded a 6-year process that undertook a comprehensive evaluation of what's called a multimedia evaluation of both biodiesel and renewable diesel. I'll include a link to that. This was a external peer review based process, very comprehensive, looked at air pollution, water pollution, soil, toxics, and other sort of environmental and public health impacts. All of these significant regulatory agencies, including CARB, Water Board, an Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, Department of Toxic Substances Control, and other agencies were involved in this long process looking at, where are the data gaps? What does the literature say? How do we fill in the data gaps? And so forth. University of California at Berkeley, UC Davis, and University of California at Riverside were all involved in this peer review process. The upshot is that after this 6-year process, the California Environmental Policy Council, which is comprised of the heads of all of these agencies, found that biodiesel use reduces PM, particulate matter, total hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, air toxics, including benzene, ethyl benzene, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, reduces cancer risk from diesel exhaust PM, reduces GHGs, and improves public health due to that reduction. And it does not pose a significant adverse impact to environmental health or public health or the environment. I point this out because these agencies have staff that have dozens of scientists that have studied, fuels like biodiesel for many, many years. In CARB's case, for well over a decade. In US EPA for more than 2 decades, and none of these 3 have changed any positions on biodiesel. So I respect the fact that there are studies continuing, and those ought to be continuing to do. And I agree that there's not a lot of data and studies on the heating sector, but the data from the studies that are out there, and there's a lot of it on vehicular emissions characterizations, all clearly point to substantial emission benefits and related public health benefits. So I disagree with the mischaracterization that these fuels have marginal benefits relative to fossil fuel. I think that's a mischaracterization of the way the public health protective agencies and NGOs view these fuels. And so I would like to see you know, a statement in the front part of this, as well as in front of the biofuels where this is applicable, that, you know, reflects the fact that the agencies, the preeminent agencies and NGOs out there that are in charge of protecting public health from air pollution exposure have a general consensus that these fuels are provide significant public health benefits. I think that context is missing from this document. I'll
So
leave it
I
at
take,
that.
thank you, Floyd. So I take from that as it's written, you would not support it being forwarded to the PUC. Is that correct?
That's a long way of saying yes.
Yes. Well, I don't know where we're going to end up on all this, but I would encourage you, at the very least, to draft those sentences in case there's an opportunity to insert them into this document. Sam?
Thanks, Rick. Thanks, Floyd, and apologies as I had to switch to my phone here. So I hope I'm not like too close up in your guys' faces. I'm trying to read the document. It's been said already, but first of all, just want to say really appreciate all of the work that's gone into this, especially from the last draft. I mean, this is a major, major improvement with a lot of clear changes, and it's obvious that, you know, all of the information that's been provided in conversations that we've had since then has been taken into account, and I really appreciate that. I am going to be nitpicky just a little bit. I think I'm reasonably close to voting yes on this document, but I do have maybe a question, if we can, on 2 items under the RNG section. And Catherine, are you able to scroll up just a little bit? So right there, where it says that one recent study found biomethane versus fossil natural gas increased methane emissions and ammonia emissions. I'd love to understand that a little bit.
Uh-oh.
We've lost you, Sam.
Bit more.
Sam, we've lost you.
That it doesn't
Like you might be on a train or something.
Yeah. Sam, we've lost you.
I don't understand how that's.
Okay, Sam, we've lost you. We'll come back to you. Dr. Brown.
So I just noticed Jared's got his hand up. I wasn't sure if it was easier if he was responding to something, an earlier comment, if it's easier to go to him first and then to me, or whatever your preference is.
No, I'm going to you for now,
Okay,
please.
fair enough. No, so also like others have said, really just want to acknowledge the amount of work that's gone into this, especially this revised version by Jared and Emily and Dr. Travis. You know, really major undertaking. So certainly want to acknowledge that. Just a suggestion, I think, because as you accurately note, there's not much out there for heating, certainly compared to the automotive sector. I know that I had submitted a number of studies that have been done. I believe Floyd did as well, pointing not at the heating sector with regards to these specific biofuels, but rather the differences in operating conditions between automotive engines where you've got much higher temperatures, much higher compression ratios, pressures, et cetera, and the heating sector, and just the impact that has on a lot of the pollutants, right? You get higher NOx, you get greater toxicity in the automotive under those conditions than under heating. Just wondering if it might be worthwhile to include, in that section you've drafted about that uncertainty, just pointing to some of these studies that have been done showing that you do have greater rates of emissions for automotive engines compared to the heating sector. It's not going to be the same as if you'd had actual studies looking at these biofuels in the heating sector, but to help provide some much, I think, very important nuance and context to try to kind of shore up some of those shortcomings in the literature right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Jared, then Nora, then Floyd. And I think Sam is back on by phone, so we'll go to him afterwards.
Thanks. I will try to respond to a few of the comments stated. Floyd, I appreciate your comment. My concern is that I think that those statements were much more defensible when comparing biodiesel to low sulfur diesel or number 2 fuel oil that had even higher levels of sulfur, affecting a lot of different pollutants. So that's my concern. I think if those statements were clearly based on, at least in the realm of biodiesel, if those statements were clearly comparing to ultra low sulfur diesel, and those references can be sent and like clearly specified to me, I'm willing to consider them. Otherwise, I don't feel very willing, and I would be strongly opposed to just adding statements that certain organizations support, because there's so much devil in the details there, and I would need a lot more evidence to put that on par with what's in this document right now. So that's my comment to Floyd. Sam's we can come back to, but I think if it's about that one article he was asking about, I don't think I'm going to be able to respond to specifics about any single articles in real time. I'm happy to send it to you and we can look into it more. But I'm not going to remember the details of the article he was asking about right now. And then for Dr. Brown, and I really appreciate that statement as well. I did, and maybe this can be wordsmithed to address your comment more, but I did try to include a statement that basically said emissions from transportation sources aren't directly comparable to residential sources. What I was mostly looking for was in an automotive engine study, did comparing let's say biomethane to fossil gas, did that result in higher or lower emissions? So I was more interested in sort of the relative change, and I never in here made direct comparisons to the level of emissions between those studies and their use in heating fuels. If that assumption about relativity is, if you take issue with that, then please provide more information, because I don't know if that holds up in all cases at all times, but that was the working assumption that I was going with. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Jared. We'll come back to you, Floyd, in a moment. Nora Travis.
Hi, thanks. So I just wanted to offer for the wider tag a little bit more about the process. So we really zoomed in, as Jared said, on residential heat applications, which is, the emissions that are going to come out of residential heat appliances. And for that universe, presently, it's very small. In fact, we couldn't find anything with ultra low sulfur diesel, which we know is really the fossil fuel that is blended with biodiesel in the current distribution system. Although through contacts that I have with Brookhaven National Laboratory, I know a study has been done and it should be published by the middle to end of 2025. So starting with that real public health focus in the home and into ambient air is where we started, looking for apples to apples. And as of today, that is limited. So then, as Jared explained, we zoomed out to include some of the transportation studies, which are more uncertain. But again, as he pointed out, there's no red flags. But with respect to sort of the appeal to EPA authority, within the document, we've included the statement from EPA's Biofuels and the Environment Third Triennial Report, which says, there's, even from the transportation sector, they're considering real-world conditions, research limited. I understand, it's all ASTM certified and it's been approved for commerce, and but that might not necessarily translate to the public health focus that we were looking at, which is emissions from residential appliances. I'll offer as a counter argument, wood emissions factors haven't been updated for 25 years. But, you know, that's what's happened with wood, and the public health science has evolved tremendously in 25 years, updating the public health impact. And in fact, because of NESCOM work, EPA will be updating their emissions factors. So I think the references to UC Riverside and Irvine and all those in the California document are based on transportation studies, which again does at least help us get a sense of the landscape. And we included the APT memo, which also is a literature review, and we'd be happy, I mean, Jared, correct me if I'm wrong, but we'd be happy to include the California document, where, you know, and just basically pointing out where there's apples to apples and where there's not. All that being said, you know, we agree in general that public health is bigger than just emissions from the residential appliances, but we're working with what we have, and other, I think, discussions on the tag are looking at life cycle assessment and just broader things. You know, again, we're open for conversation, but I don't think there's anything in this document that's glaringly controversial.
Well, thank you, Nora. Floyd, we'll hear from you, and then I'll ask some questions about how to proceed.
Yeah, just a time check. We have like 7 minutes left till the end.
Right.
I want you to know that I have to sign off, so at exactly 12:30 to catch a flight. So you'll need to take over if you want to extend the meeting.
Well, we'll need to extend it for a couple minutes because we won't have touched on some other issues.
Hey,
Floyd?
Rick, I'm also here on the phone. Sorry for interrupting, but would love
No,
to have the chance to give input after the point.
I will get back to you, Sam. Yes, please.
I'll make this real quick. So thank you, Jared, for pointing out that the one thing that I kind of blanked out on, I had it in my notes. The reason why I pointed out the California multimedia evaluation was it did a specific comparison of California ultra low sulfur diesel, which at the time had been 15 ppm sulfur for I think about 9 years at that point, and compared it to biodiesel. So, you know, to the extent that that addresses that concern you raised, at least from a transportation side of things, again, it's not a perfect extrapolation, but to the extent that that informs this process, I think that's probably your most comprehensive peer review based evaluation of the literature. I would also point out that that multimedia evaluation didn't just do a peer review, didn't just do a review of the literature, but it identified the gaps in that literature and established testing that was done by UC Riverside in order to fill in those gaps. So I'm happy to share that with you. Take a look at that and see if that informs additional revisions.
Thanks, Floyd.
Yeah, can I just quickly respond and say that, yeah, thanks, Floyd. I would appreciate it if you could send that to me. And if possible, to point to the specific sections that are relevant here. And, you know, as far as it fits the parameters of what we included here, I'm very happy to include it.
Great, thank you. We're going to hear from Sam, and then I'm going to propose how we proceed. Sam.
Thanks, Rick. I'll be direct with my 2 comments here on those 2 bullets under RNG. The second one is around gas stoves. I don't think that applies here, frankly, because if we're looking at combustion emissions from different appliances, then we're looking at combustion emissions from different appliances. If anything, RNG is going to give an improvement in a gas stove based on my understanding. So, you know, I'm not sure why that's there, but I would ask that it's removed unless there's a good reason to keep it. And if we keep it, we need parity with the other technologies. Second, on the bullet above that references methane and ammonia emissions, I guess I just like to understand, and you don't have to answer this now, but I'd like to understand the sort of process behind how that's happening. I mean, to say, so I took a quick look at the study. It basically said that because biomethane has a slightly higher methane content than fossil gas, so in other words, instead of there being some of the higher chain hydrocarbons in biomethane, there's more methane that replaces that. There's then more methane leakage. So I guess they're assuming some methane leakage at the point of use. I mean, it just seems a little bit misleading, right? Because the way it's written makes that sound like biomethane is causing some significant amount of methane leakage, but really it's just saying that the methane content is higher in biomethane. So if it leaks, then there's more methane. I think that it's a little bit misrepresentative there. And with ammonia, I'm not aware of how that's really possible. Ammonia has a combustion emission from RNG is what that sounds like. That's not accurate. So I would just like to revisit that one. Otherwise, I really appreciate all the work on this. I think it's great, and I'm close to being able to sign off on it. Thank you.
Thank you. We're approaching the end of our time. We still have another item at least on the agenda. I think at this point, if people are willing to stay on for 10 more minutes, we'll just go through the agenda and identify how we want to move forward. On this question, on the question of this memo, someone can make a motion at this moment to advance this memo as it is to the PUC, or we can turn it back to Jared and others to refine it, to address the questions that have been raised, and then see if we can come up with a version that we'd want to forward to the PUC, which we would discuss at a meeting that I would propose in January. Actually, toward the end of, I'm not going for 2 meetings a month now, at least not to start, but I would propose that our next meeting be in the last week of January, I think in the 23rd or 25th, whatever that Thursday is. So that's where I would go with this. Ken Jones, Catherine Morris, by the way, has a hard stop, as she said, in 1 minute, and we're gonna have to stop so I can start the recording again. And Emily Grubert has to leave as well.
Yeah, we'll make the motion. I won't make it right now because what I want to say is I think I recognize the intent of this whole activity, which is to kind of highlight if we pursue clean heat measures, are there specific public health endpoints that we really need to be aware of? I think this document does a very good job of summarizing the topic. And I know a lot of these renewable fuel topics have detail, nuance, but in terms of do they set flags for us to consider credit values and some mechanism to assure that we're not harming the public, I think this document does a fine job. So my summary of it is that in most cases, we move forward with the clean heat measures. The one that I think is appropriately flagged is wood. And I think that's where we are also with wood, that the burning of non-pellet wood needs to be really, really carefully considered. We don't have clean heat measures that use non-pellets. And for pellets, that may, because the carbon intensity value still hasn't been resolved, we may want to influence the carbon intensity value to reflect public health. But this document, I think, accomplishes what it's supposed to. And while could it be more perfect? Yes, but oh my God, we've got so much work to do. And I appreciate Jared's work. I move that we accept this document and push it forward to the Public Utility Commission. Thank you.
I completely agree. I think there's already been a huge amount of time spent on this, and I'm just reluctant to keep pushing it out when I think there's such a high value in conveying the information already assembled.
Is that a second to the motion?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, we have a motion and it's been seconded. Is there any discussion before we take a vote? And I will open this briefly to public comment, very brief.
Hey, Rick.
Yeah,
Any members-
give me a
Sam.
minute here, Ken, I'm
Oh.
sorry. I mean, Chair Weston.
Yeah.
I'm on a different device now and searching for the raise hand function. I want to just respond very quickly to one of the things Ken mentioned about adjusting the carbon intensity values for the, health impacts. I think that's, I understand the rationale, but I think that's problematic. I mean, the act clearly says, you need to address the impacts of clean heat measures. It doesn't say how, but it's, it is pretty clear that the idea is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And, I think we have made a lot of progress with trying to identify appropriate emission factors for, a whole number of fuels and measures in order to be able to, come up with some kind of a methodology that provides some progress towards meeting the GWSA goals. I think trying to layer on something outside of what the carbon intensity calculation is supposed to do to address these health impacts is not the way that we really want to go. I don't have an alternative on how to address that beyond just saying, if at some threshold, we aren't going to recommend that some measures or fuels be eligible for clean heat credits because of this. But I don't think that we're there yet either.
But if I can, this motion I was just making a comment about the document. This motion I do not believe opens that door at all. That door is down the road. This motion is, let's take this document and accept it.
Right. Oh, I heard that. But then you said this other thing, and I just wanted to respond to that.
Great, thank you. Any other
Hey, Rick.
comments?
You guys hear me at all?
Yes, Sam?
Thank you. Just a quick comment. Generally, again, agree that this does a pretty good job, but I think it's important to say, I feel pretty strongly that there's still some great mischaracterizations around RNG and based on what Floyd said around the liquid biofuels. And I think it would be a really big mistake to put this through as is. Happy to take the vote, but just want to register, folks. I think it would be a big mistake. We're close, but we're not there yet.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, I am gonna take public comment, very brief. Are there any members of the public who want to say anything before we vote? Seeing none. Okay, we're going to vote. I'm going to do a roll call. Emily Levin,
And so if I vote yes, that means I want to move forward.
you want to are you in favor of the motion to send the document as is to the PUC?
Yes.
Jared Ulmer,
Yes.
Matthew Bakerpool,
Yes.
Brian Woods,
Yes.
Matt Coda, well, maybe Matt's not here.
Yeah, I don't see him.
Okay, Emily Roscoe,
Yes.
okay, Moose,
Yes.
Ken Jones,
Yes.
Patrick Wood is not here, Floyd,
Close, like Sam said, but I'm going to be a no.
okay, Sam,
Likewise, close, but I'm also a no.
Michelle. Did Michelle have to leave? Casey,
Yes.
Emily Grubert.
I think she
Oh,
also
she
has to
left.
leave.
She left, yeah, okay. And me. I'm no on this. So my count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 in favor, 3 no's, and that's where we stand. Are there any abstentions? Okay, we're not there yet. We're close. We can decide how to proceed with this with further work if we're willing to do that. Okay, the next.
Sorry, what do you mean by saying we're not there yet, we're close? Do you mean there's not strong support? I thought this would still be conveyed.
No, it won't. No, that's not, the memo doesn't have a strong majority.
Oh, so I guess I've misunderstood that all along. I thought we were still conveying things even if they didn't have a strong majority and just communicating that they didn't have a strong majority.
We have done that. That is correct. And Brian has pointed out the process issues here. And I've failed in this regard to be consistent in this. The PUC has the document, right? Okay, and they knows the vote through our minutes. But as it stands now, I don't. Yes, we've uncovered an inconsistency here, and I'm not sure exactly what to do about it now.
Would it be appropriate, since we were able to have most of this discussion, since several people had to sign off, of having Catherine follow up with folks as she did with the advanced wood heat?
Well, we did that. We did it immediately after that. I'm uncomfortable with that at this point. I really do feel that and I take full responsibility for it. I've played a little loose sometimes with our process, and perhaps I shouldn't have, and I should have been more careful. This isn't going anywhere. Okay. Anyway, this is something we can take up again. We're close. I'm not going to forward it. I'm making the executive decision, and it'll be back on the agenda for our next meeting. And I'll, in the meantime, work with you all behind, individually to see what we can do to make it work. But that's where I stand right now. Brian?
Yes, and I just want to add that anybody can submit comments to the docket for their own organizations, just as we're doing and others have done.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay, the final item on the agenda is a memo that I've drafted to send to the PUC. I'm not actually asking for TAG permission to do so, but if everyone screams bloody murder at this moment, I won't send it. What I want is your feedback on it so that I can send something from the chair of the TAG describing what we've done the past year and what is still outstanding. That was my intent with this memo, and also to, treat it essentially as a year-end report. I am open to hearing objections to that and amending my approach. So let me just open the discussion. Oh gosh, something? We're still recording. So, folks, Floyd Vergara.
Yeah, thanks. I just had a question, and you touched on it a minute ago, but I thought I'd ask. So there's a number of places where we said the memo says didn't reach a strong consensus, but it didn't convey what the vote was. And I was wondering, is there a reason why that's the case? I thought there were a number of significant issues that we took votes on, and even if we didn't reach a strong majority, it's still informative for the PUC to see how the group voted as a whole.
I didn't, it sounds like I was inconsistent on that. I'll go back and check those votes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and that I think relates to the previous issue too, Rick, is that in some cases, I mean, I recognize that PUC can go back and look through the minutes, but I guess I had been under the impression all along that when we had like actual materials that were in a state of finality and we had a vote, that we were conveying those along with the vote so the PUC could reference them easily rather than having to dig through things, rather than only passing them along if they were associated with a strong majority. So I think we should think about that a little bit.
I hear you. What you're saying is that I should send this memo to the PUC with this vote, as we've done before, and I'm reluctant to do it at this point.
But I guess it doesn't, that's just my general feeling, that, like, you know, with all of these votes, that I thought that when we discussed conveying something as a strong majority, that just reflected like the sort of the weight that the PUC should give it, in a sense, or
yes, you're absolutely correct, and that is you're correct. I'm sorry, I'm struggling with this, and I may just revise. You're absolutely correct. We have. It does suggest the weight of the vote. I'm just struggling with it.
I guess I'm just pointing it out with respect to the status report, as sort of as Floyd mentioned, that if the status report includes all these places where we say, you know, we voted on this thing, you know, 6-5 or whatever it is, but then they don't actually have the thing we voted on, or they inconsistently have it, that just seems odd to me.
Fair, you've made your point. You're making me reconsider. Brian?
I was just going to ask what your deadline for this is. I'm going to have to confess I did not, with all the materials that I've been reviewing, I have not had an opportunity.
Well, I was hoping to send it shortly, but if the tag is uncomfortable with that, I won't do it. Ken?
Well, wait, I just have one more comment on like my understanding of the process, which I think I've made clear. And I recall, like, at the outset of this adventure that we've all been on, that, you know, we made a conscious decision. We were going to, you know, have this process, and we were not going to use strict rules, and, you know, we were all going to work to get consensus. And then we compromised on this 10-vote strong consensus approach. I'm not trying to demean or in any way say anything about the quality of the work that has been done, that has been presented in front of this group. I think it's all really very helpful and important work. You know, I just go back to, you know, the way I was reflecting on the process right at the beginning. It's like, if these are going to be the rules that people want to go by, then let's agree to follow the rules. If we want to change the rules midstream, that's okay, but let's agree as a group to change the rules midstream. But right now, I've always and consistently been operating and expressed the way that I think this group agreed to operate. If I'm incorrect, then
what you're saying is that are you saying that unless there's a strong consensus, we don't forward documents to the PUC?
That was my understanding of where we landed. Back when we started, it was like, we will attempt to achieve consensus, which is no objections. But if we can't achieve a consensus, then 10 votes or more would be considered a strong majority. And then those were the recommendations that would be forwarded by the tag. Again, this does not prevent anybody from forwarding any products, opinions, or anything else that they have to the docket, you know, directly. All right. This is just we are expressing the will of the tag, as, again, we agreed when we started this process on how we were going to do it.
And and if we want to change that, that's a great discussion to have, but that's another discussion that we should have as a group and come to some kind of a conclusion on it and decide whether it's a simple majority that changes it, or if it's this 10-vote majority or whatever it is. But I've always started with like, what are the rules? So if I know the rules, then I can play the game. If I don't know the rules, then the game is harder to play.
You're right, Brian. I appreciate that. Ken, and then I will propose how we're going to proceed.
Well, maybe I can give you some comfort, Mr. Chair. I felt the way that vote took place is that we can get to a strong agreement if there were some modifications made to that document. So by not forwarding it, it exists. And again, I feel comfortable because I don't feel there's anything in that document that should give the Public Utility Commission pause to move forward. But in January, we can perhaps modify the document and actually have a document that we do forward with strong agreement. I feel that's the path. So I'm perfectly fine not forwarding it along because it exists. And again, and I don't believe there's anything in it that will cause the PUC to do what I think the legislature is asking, which is, okay, make sure you modify the implementation of the clean heat standard to address public health concerns. And there's nothing in that suggests that need at this point, but we can make it better, and that's fine. So let's make it better. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. And that's the approach I was going to propose. And I will
We're
also
talking about your letter, Rick. We're not talking about the health thing now.
Oh yeah, I wasn't going to send the letter. Oh, I thought we were talking about the health thing.
I thought Ken was talking about the health benefits. And he was, because that was the vote, but we're not talking about that now. Now we're talking about your letter.
Yeah, there's been discussion. I'm not going to send the letter. That's something for further discussion. We haven't had a time to look through it, to talk about it.
Do you have a deadline? I'd
No.
love to read and comment.
No, I have no deadline. And as I said, I feel that as chair, I can send a memo, to the PUC stating where we stand, but it sounds like maybe not. I just thought that would be a courtesy to the PUC. So I'm not going to send it, and we'll talk about it at our next meeting. Okay, and I'll follow up with you individually. Lloyd had a couple of questions about what it ought to say. I do feel this discussion, and I apologize to everyone for not being assiduous about our procedures and making sure that we were consistent. And that's entirely my fault. And I apologize for that. So I will come back to the tag at our next meeting, which we're going to propose for, as I say, that final Thursday in January. But I'll reconsider that, and maybe as soon as if there's reason to have a meeting sooner, we will. And that'll be something that will emerge from offline discussions. And I will try to come back with a proposal for how we should consistently approach these issues. And so I apologize. That's entirely on my shoulders. And I'll leave it at that. We've gone way over time, and I do appreciate so much the hard work that everyone's done on everything. And it's frustrating, I know, when things don't go quite the way you like. But we are still doing good work. And as we can see from the PUC's order, that they are listening to us, and they do care what we have to say. As you know, the PUC is going to file a report by the 15th. It's going to contain a final rule, I guess. Deirdre, you can correct me. A final rule, a check back report, and an economic analysis. And I think it makes sense for us to have those in mind when we next meet, because I think there's a lot that's up in the air, and we should take a step back and take a look at what what may happen in the legislature, where we think we're headed, and see how we can contribute to those efforts. I've talked to some of you about that. We obviously have a statutory mandate, but we may want to say some things about where things are headed, and we just don't know where they're headed at this point. That's my thought. If anyone has anything to add. If not, then I would just say at this point, you'll hear from Catherine or me about a date and all the dial-in information. But at this point, that's what we thought would be most appropriate, is at the end of January. Does anybody else have anything to say?
The only thing I'll endorse is, the status report would have been super helpful to include in the January 15th report to the legislature. And I know that there is some opportunity for the chair, to communicate that or something, just not necessarily a whole tag weigh in, but anyway, just wanted to endorse that if it's possible, just to kind of get a status report of the work done, but understood if it's not possible. If the group does not meet until the end of January, then so be it.
I could send a memo that says, I hope to have a report by the end of January.
Fair enough.
That can just be reflected in the minutes.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And to everyone, I apologize for these snafus. I do want to say to everyone how much I and others, I know the PUC appreciates all the hard work you're doing. I want to thank Deirdre, Catherine, all of the members of the TAG and members of the public who have, stayed with us patiently through this process. It's been certainly educational. And I want to wish you all the happiest of holidays, and we'll catch you, on the other side of the new year. Again, my best to you all. Many thanks, and we'll be in touch. Oh, Ken, you have one last thing.
Yeah, I hate to do this, but what about public comment?
Okay. Yeah, you're right.
I know people have expressed interest.
Thank you. Is there any final public comment from folks? Mike, Mr. Porter.
This is Thomas Weiss.
Oh, wait, Mr. Weiss, I'll get you second. Mr. Porter.
Just a quick public comment that requesting that future public comments be offered at the time that the topic is being offered. I missed comment time on the wood discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Weiss.
I'm concerned that nobody on the TAG has actually a copy of your procedures to have referred to during the discussion on the motion you took on whether to send the health impacts to the PUC or not. I am looking at an item from the March 21st, 2024 materials that indicates it's the final version. And on quorum and voting, a quorum is 8 members. The TAG will act by majority vote of those present. I believe the vote count was 11 were present. So unless there are later rules of procedure than that, the majority vote was to send that document approved through the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Weiss. I'll go back and I'll take a look at that, and as well, see how that squares with our 10 members for a strong consensus point. And it may be in that very nexus that we can make a decision on how to deal with future votes. I appreciate that very much. That's helpful. Okay, folks, I will come back prepared to have this discussion and clarify our rules. Thank you all. once again, best wishes for the holidays.
And Rick, thank you. Please don't be too hard on yourself. I think we've all been confused about our processes at various points, and we've done a huge amount of work, and you know, we're all doing our best as volunteers. So
No, well, thank you, but I appreciate that. That's fine. Best to all, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, Rick, for all the hard work. It really has been a lot of work, and you've done a great job chairing this for a year.
thank you.
Thank you, Liz.
It's a lot
Totally
of work.
agree. Totally
Yeah.
agree.
That's
Really.
very kind, but please, no.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and enjoy the holidays.
Bye.
Happy holidays.
Yep.